Our story opens on a red-haired girl staring, stunned, at the unfamiliar reflection in the mirror. Just minutes earlier, she had still been Haruna Hashimoto, an 18-year-old high school girl who had just lived through the ultimate tragedy. That day, she'd come home early and frozen in shock, catching her stepmother in the middle of an affair, and a fierce argument had broken out. In the end, her stepmother's lover and the woman herself had cruelly shoved her down the stairs, and her short 18 years of life ended right there, in a cold pool of blood. In her final moments, only one thought lingered in her mind. She still hadn't finished reading The Tyrant's Path. What would become of Uriel in the end? And then a bizarre miracle happened. She was transported straight into the male lead novel she'd been reading, but heaven really did have a twisted sense of humor. Waking up in this body, she realized in shock that she had become Irene Ashburn, the most hated villainess in the entire story. The original owner's memories flooded in. Irene Ashburn, a woman who had committed countless unforgivable crimes. And the ending in store for her was to be beheaded by the blade of Uriel Gallerini, the very character she used to admire most. From the moment that head hit the ground and the blood spilled, the Ashburn family had officially begun its fall into ruin. She clutched her head, ready to lose her mind. Last life, she'd been pushed down a staircase, and this life she'd barely opened her eyes before facing a death sentence. And on top of that, she was about to be executed by her own favorite character. Was fate just playing a joke on her? While she was racking her brain trying to figure out which life was worse, a flash of insight suddenly struck her. Wait a moment. If the story was still only in its early stage, before Uriel infiltrated the Duke's estate and turned fully dark, then she still had a chance. All she had to do was actively rack up goodwill, treat the male lead well from here on out. And who knew? Maybe she could keep this little life of hers. While she was absorbed in her perfect survival plan, the maid brushing her hair accidentally yanked a lock of Irene's hair too hard. The maid, terrified out of her mind, immediately dropped to her knees, trembling all over. "Please spare me, my lady. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pull your hair." Looking down at the maid's arm, covered in scars, Irene shivered faintly. It seemed the original owner of this body really had been a merciless, wicked woman. She'd been about to smooth things over by saying it was just one strand of hair, no big deal. But Irene caught herself just in time. No good. If she suddenly turned kind out of nowhere, it would surely make everyone suspicious. Irene bent down, reached out and gave a gentle tug to a lock of the maid's hair as the girl squeezed her eyes shut, awaiting death. Then smiled and said, "Then I'll forgive you in exchange for these 2 strands of hair." Her mind flooded with question marks. Is my lady in a good mood today? Seeing the maid still trembling with fear, Irene said softly, "Since you feel so guilty about it, I'll give you a chance to atone." Before the maid could even catch her breath, Irene sprang to her feet, gown flowing, radiating an aura of pure elegance. She was ready for the first step in her mission to keep her own head. "Take me to the Knight's Hall right now." The male lead of the novel titled The Tyrant's Path was named Uriel Gallerini. He was the son of a noble house, blessed with talent and courage from birth. On the brutal battlefield, Uriel shone like a beacon of hope. But under the rule of an incompetent emperor, his path to the peak of power turned out to be soaked in blood and utterly ruthless. That worthless emperor, consumed by jealousy over the Gallerini family's brilliant military achievements, used the most despicable schemes to slaughter the entire clan. Having lost everything, Uriel had nowhere left to go. He was forced to hide his identity under the false name Diane von Bessel and slip into the estate of Duke Ashburn, a loyal enforcer of the emperor, posing as a knight bodyguard, and cruelly enough, it was there that he crossed paths with the eldest daughter, Irene. Just because Uriel refused to grovel and flatter her, that woman had unleashed every kind of cruel torment upon him. It was the original Irene herself who, with her own hands, had molded the cold-blooded tyrant Uriel would later become. Realizing this, the present-day Irene grabbed the hem of her dress and hurried out into the pouring rain. At that moment, only one thought filled her mind: do everything possible to steer the story away from its original course. She had to stay far away from the death sentence hanging over her neck. Please, don't let it already be too late. But heaven seemed determined to test just how resilient this little girl could be. In the middle of the cold brick courtyard, Uriel's tall figure knelt beneath the pouring rain. He had been kneeling there the entire night, all because of the original Irene's absurd order for him to reflect on his conduct. Hearing footsteps, Uriel slowly lifted his head. His gaze was sharp, gloomy, and cold enough to chill her to the bone. Oh no, that look was exactly the look he wore in the novel right before he killed someone. Her goodwill points had gone into negative infinity. The guillotine was already beckoning her. But her survival instinct wouldn't let her collapse. Irene pulled herself together. As long as Uriel still remained in this estate, that meant she still had a chance. Irene forced an arrogant edge into her voice. "Stand up?" The only response she got was defiant silence. Irene stepped closer, tapping the tip of her shoe lightly against his leg. "You're blocking my way." She figured doing this would keep him from suspecting her sudden change. Pressed into it, Uriel staggered to his feet, but his body, utterly exhausted after a night in the rain, made him lose his footing and fall forward. On pure reflex, Irene abandoned her villainous act entirely, rushing to catch his soaked body in her arms, blurting out in a panic, "Be careful." The instant their bodies touched, Uriel froze in shock, then quickly stepped back, his voice hoarse and distant. "You'd best keep your distance, my lady. I'm covered in mud." The maids nearby saw this and immediately swarmed in, screaming at Uriel for daring to touch their lady. Just then, another maid rushed over to announce that Lady Melinda was calling for Irene. But the sharp-tongued maid wouldn't let it go, tossing her head and asking, "My lady, what should we do with this insolent wretch?" Irene's gaze wavered slightly. She wanted to let him off. But doing so right now would shatter her arrogant facade completely. Gritting her teeth, fully committing to the villainous role, Irene tossed her head, turned away coldly, and said, "You're right. I can't even bear to look at a filthy creature like him. Get out of my sight." On the outside, she played it cold and heartless, but deep inside, she was clasping her hands together and screaming, "I'm so sorry, dear male lead. I'm just trying to keep up appearances here." The silhouette of her umbrella faded slowly behind the curtain of rain. Uriel stood rooted to the spot, his gaze tangled with complicated feelings as he watched the haughty young ladies retreating back. Unbidden, her panicked expression and that painfully sincere cry of "be careful" from moments ago surfaced in his mind. The silhouette of her umbrella faded slowly behind the curtain of rain. Uriel stood rooted to the spot, his gaze tangled with complicated feelings as he watched the haughty young ladies retreating back. Unbidden, her panicked expression and that painfully sincere cry of "be careful" from moments ago surfaced in his mind. Summoned so suddenly, Irene's footsteps grew heavy as lead. Being called in like this could surely mean nothing good. Inside her head, she began writing and performing a whole string of worst-case scenarios. What if they'd figured out she was a fake? Everything would fall apart. They'd surely scream, "This brat isn't our daughter. She's been possessed by a demon, burn her alive." At the thought of being tied to a burning stake, Irene felt a chill run through her. She considered clutching her stomach, holding her head, and mumbling something about faking illness to make her escape. But it was too late. The door to the ladies' room already loomed right before her eyes. Once the arrow's loosed, there's no choice but to see it through. The moment she stepped through the door, before Irene could even catch her breath, Lady Melinda hit her with an opening volley of scolding. Cold sweat broke out all over her as she lamented silently to herself. Ever since fate had thrown her into this mess, all she'd managed to do was clean up the wreckage left behind by the original owner. But the moment she looked up and met Lady Melinda's face head-on, every complaint in Irene's mind instantly froze solid. That face, those eyes, unlocked without warning, a painful memory buried since her past life. It was the image of her birth mother, lying frail on her deathbed. Her mother's weak, broken voice echoed in Haruna's ears. "Even when I'm gone, you must live on and live strong. In another world, I'll always be watching over you." Her nose stung, and the tears she'd held back for so long suddenly burst forth. No longer the arrogant #1 villainess, nor the transmigrated soul anxiously fearing exposure. In this moment, she was simply a wounded child, aching for a mother's love. Irene rushed forward and buried her face against the Duchess's legs, sobbing like a child. "Mom, I miss you so much." This explosive outburst left Lady Melinda utterly stunned. She fumbled to comfort her, voice flustered. "Irene, what's wrong with you? Tell me what happened. Are you really this afraid of being scolded?" "Goodness, I would never be angry with you over something like this." And just like that, what was meant to be an interrogation instantly turned into a festival of sweet talking. She pushed the entire tray of expensive jewelry on the table toward Irene, generously declaring she'd buy every last piece just to cheer her up. Holding a towering stack of jewelry boxes in her arms, Irene still had tears glistening in her eyes. Lady Melinda stepped closer, gently placing a hand against her cheek. Her gaze brimmed with boundless affection. "I never want to see you this sad." Reason kept reminding her of one truth. The elegant woman comforting her so tenderly right now was not, in any way, her real mother from the world beyond. And yet that gentle gaze, that familiar warmth, felt strangely, uncannily like her mother. As the tears kept falling, Irene buried her head against the Duchess's hand, telling herself, "I don't ever want to lose this warmth again. Mom, I'll try my best to live strong once more. Please watch over me, wherever you are." But that rare, peaceful moment didn't last long before the sound of the door opening rang out. A bright, obedient voice carried in, "Aunt Melinda, I've come to say good morning." The girl who stepped into the room had light brown hair and a smile radiant as sunshine. Right behind her followed two other figures, the eldest son Jason and the second son Arwen of the Ashburn Dukes family. Seeing Irene there too, the girl feigned utter surprise, clasping her hands together in delight. "Sister Irene, you're here too? It's rare to see you come for morning greetings like this." "I'm so happy to see you." Irene's gaze slowly turned icy as the data from the original novel flooded back into her mind. That girl with her delicate, lily-pure appearance was none other than Lucia Crawford, Irene's cousin. Using the excuse of losing her mother and being oppressed by her stepmother, she had come to seek shelter with Lady Melinda and had put down roots in this estate for the past 6 months. Wielding her innocent, fragile facade, Lucia easily manipulated everyone's emotions, winning the full protection of the entire family, especially Irene's two older brothers. But it was all just one perfectly executed act. The brutal truth was, when the Ashburn family was finally cornered with no way out, it was Lucia herself who stabbed them in the back. She hadn't hesitated to hand over fatal evidence to the male lead, Uriel, pushing the very family that had once taken her in toward certain death, all in exchange for a position of power in the new regime. If Uriel was the one who swung the blade that ended this family, then the one who personally placed that blade in his hand was none other than Lucia. Back in the present, Lucia threw herself into Lady Melinda's arms, acting affectionate and clingy, playing the role of a sweet, obedient niece to perfection. But the very moment she was hidden behind the lady's back, she shot Irene a sidelong glance. A venomous smirk, a taunting, mocking look that sent chills down the spine. Irene's hand curled slowly into a fist. "I absolutely have to stop Lucia, not just for my own head, but for the lady's sake too." Just then, Lucia pranced about showing off the emerald green dress she planned to wear to the birthday party, skillfully earning a nod of praise from Lady Melinda. But her real target wasn't the dress at all. Scanning across the jewelry table, Lucia's gaze instantly locked onto a sparkling purple crystal necklace. Her masterful gold-digging skills began kicking into gear. She picked up the necklace, gasping in delight, holding it up against her chest and cooing over it nonstop. Needless to say, her two hopelessly infatuated older brothers fell right into the trap. Arwen smiled, eager to please, while Jason waved his hand grandly. "If you like it, I'll buy it for you. Something this beautiful was clearly made for you. Don't be shy." But before Lucia's smug smile could fully bloom, Lady Melinda doused it with a bucket of cold water. "That won't do, Jason. That's the piece I bought specifically for Irene." Hearing this, Lucia's face froze stiff, as if sprayed with hairspray. Seeing her treasure snatched away, second brother Arwen instantly bristled, raising his voice at his own mother. "Mom, why would you give Irene something this precious? With her terrible reputation, who would even invite her to a party to wear it anyway? Isn't Lucia the one actually upholding this family's dignity?" Sipping her tea, Irene's gaze turned cold. So that's how it is. Lucia never asks for anything herself. She always uses her two older brothers as her mouthpiece. The original Irene had truly loved this family from the bottom of her heart, only to be trampled on mercilessly by them in return. But too bad for Lucia. The person sitting here now was no longer the foolish Irene of the past. To beat a gold digger, you have to fight fire with fire. Irene put on a dazzling, disarmingly innocent smile. "Brother Arwen, why would you say that? If Lucia likes it that much, of course I'll give it to her. I don't have any use for it right now anyway." She reached up to dab lightly at the corner of her eye, her voice tinged with wounded shyness. "Don't worry about me, everyone. I'll just wear the jewelry I got last year again. Even if it's a bit out of fashion, it was still a priceless gift from brother Jason." These words left both Lucia and Arwen stunned. Jason's eyes flickered. He felt a pang of guilt, breaking into a cold sweat as he realized just how long it had been since he'd bought his own sister a single gift. Jason forced an awkward smile, and was about to speak up to smooth things over, when Lady Melinda firmly took hold of Irene's hand. "If you two intend to favor Lucia, then I'll favor this child instead. Every piece of jewelry here belongs to you. Take all of it. You don't have to share with anyone." Irene smiled brightly and gave a small, timid nod of thanks. Across the room, Lucia's face had already gone deathly pale. Knowing she'd lost the upper hand, she hastily unfastened the necklace to hand it back, bowing her head to play the victim. "Sister Irene, I'm so sorry. I never meant to compete with you for anything. Of course, I know my place very well." Irene reached out and took the necklace back. The smile on her lips stayed bright, but her words carried a deeper, sharper meaning. "Good. It's good that you know." And the instant no one was watching, Lucia shot her a look full of seething resentment. "Just you wait." Once Jason had comforted her, she went right back to playing her crocodile tears game, sniffling and laying on the blame. "Sister Irene seems really strange today. I think the real reason she came to see Aunt Melinda today was to talk about me. I'm sorry for making Aunt angry, and for dragging you both into it too." With just a few tears, Lucia had successfully reignited the fire of Arwen's anger. He ground his teeth, blindly convinced that all of this was simply Irene's baseless jealousy. Though Jason tried to reason with him and admitted they'd neglected their own sister, in the end, to appease their precious cousin, the two young masters invited her out to fly a kite to cheer her up instead. The moment she heard "going out," Lucia's face bloomed into a smile, as though nothing at all had happened. Right after that exhausting round of sparring with her scheming cousin, Irene returned to her room and let out a weary sigh. Battling wits really does burn through way too many brain cells. But the real nightmare was still looming right there. The image of a cold guillotine flashed through her mind, sending a shiver down her spine. The core problem named Uriel still hadn't been resolved. Remembering how he'd knelt in the pouring rain the day before, Irene couldn't help but feel restless, wondering if his wounds had healed at all yet. Meanwhile, over at the knight's quarters, Uriel was drying his soaked hair with a towel, his shirt open at the chest, revealing a body riddled with gruesome scars. Standing beside him was Savino, a loyal subordinate seething with rage. "You're suffering far too much pain because of that wicked woman. You've endured enough already. If you keep staying here, what will she do to you next?" But in response to his subordinate's agitation, Uriel stayed silent. His eyes darkened as the bloody memories of his family's massacre came rushing back, clawing at his heart. "As long as I achieve my goal, what does this little suffering even matter? Physical pain will never compare to the pain in my heart." Hearing this, Savino ground his teeth, a flash of murderous intent lighting up his eyes. "If that's the case, then let me get rid of that wicked woman." Right as the tension was escalating, out in the hallway, the very wicked woman from Savino's mouth was creeping along step by step like a thief. Irene clutched an expensive ointment she'd gone through considerable trouble to obtain, sneaking her way toward Uriel's room. Looking at the rickety wooden door, she let out a quiet sigh. He's supposed to be the male lead, and yet he has to live in a shabby room like this? Inside the room, Uriel's sharp senses instantly detected someone approaching. He signaled for Savino to retreat immediately through the window. As for Irene, after a moment of inner struggle, she decided to go with a drop-and-dash strategy. Just leave the ointment here and slip away quickly, and he'd never know it was her. But man proposes, heaven disposes. Right at the moment Irene turned to make her escape, the door suddenly swung wide open. Irene flinched, flustered, and hid the bottle behind her back. Just then she heard someone approaching, and in a panic she clapped her hand over Uriel's mouth, then darted quickly into the room. Realizing they were now staring at each other at an incredibly close distance, Irene's maidenly heart suddenly skipped a beat. Her weakness for handsome men flared up again. Oh my God, up close he's so handsome. That hint of abs peeking through. That smooth skin, those soft lips. That high, straight nose bridge. But the very next second, her gaze met his razor-sharp eyes. Wait a second, this look right here is unmistakably the look of a man about to run someone through. Irene yelped, hastily yanked her hand back, and stumbled away. Uriel calmly wiped his mouth and turned away coldly. Knowing she'd just done something incredibly stupid, but needing to keep her villainous persona intact, Irene forced herself to keep up the act. I just happened to be passing by. Where I go in this house is entirely my own business, and a mere guard like you has no right to comment. And you are absolutely forbidden from telling anyone I was here. That's an order." The moment she finished speaking, a low, cold chuckle rang out, making her jump. Ha. In other words, you came here without telling anyone, is that right? Before she could react, Uriel's tall figure loomed down and closed in on her. His eyes were dark, and the smile on his lips carried a suffocating sense of pressure. Lady Irene, you really do have some nerve. Sneaking all the way here by yourself. Did you not consider how dangerous this could be? Gripped firmly at the wrist by Uriel's iron hand, his cold, oppressive breath enveloped the entire space. It was only then that Irene finally snapped out of her daze, realizing the man standing before her wasn't some handsome guy at a fan meeting. This was Uriel, a merciless tyrant in the making, someone who harbored the deepest hatred for her. In his eyes right now, she was nothing more than a small, harmless, pitiful animal. If he wanted to, killing her right here would be as easy as a blink. No, she couldn't die some pointless death in a place like this. Irene gritted her teeth, throwing all her strength into a fierce struggle. Let go of me right now. In the middle of their scuffle, a dry clacking sound rang out. The expensive ointment hidden in Irene's sleeve slipped free, rolling across the cold stone floor. Uriel's gaze flickered. He glanced down at the bottle, then lifted his eyes back to the woman trapped in his grip. Her sleeve had ridden up, revealing a long red oozing scratch on the proud young lady's pale skin. Sitting in her warm, cushioned room, Irene couldn't stop resting her chin in her hand and sighing. Her mind kept circling back to the image of the male lead kneeling out there, soaked to the bone. Kneeling in the rain all night, his knees must be swollen by now. Given his currently oppressed status, how could Uriel possibly obtain good medicine to treat his wound? She wanted to bring the male lead some medicine to earn goodwill, but as a villainess, she couldn't just suddenly go ask for medicine without some reason. Irene's eyes swept around the room, then landed on the wooden table. She took a deep breath, clamped a handkerchief between her teeth, and slammed her own hand down onto the table. The searing pain hit her hard enough to bring tears to her eyes. This lady's body really was fragile. The pain felt doubled somehow. But in exchange, she now had the most perfect excuse imaginable. Irene cradled her bleeding arm and called out loudly, "Nora, I accidentally scratched my hand. Hurry and fetch the most expensive, best ointment in the estate for me." Watching the flustered maid rush off to find medicine, Irene smiled to herself in satisfaction. Premium medicine secured. Now all that's left is to deliver it as tribute to the male lead. Back in the tense reality of the room, Uriel stared intently at the red scratch on Irene's arm. She's supposed to be a duke's precious daughter, so why does she have a wound like this? What's more, there's absolutely no sign of any ointment applied. Uriel's gaze drifted down to the expensive bottle rolling on the floor. A thought flickered through his mind. If she wasn't the one meant to use it, then who was this medicine meant for? The atmosphere had gone still when Uriel suddenly reached out and gently wiped at her neck. There was a smudge on your neck, but it's clean now. Released, she clutched her throat, coughing violently, breaking out in cold sweat. That excuse was way too forced. He really meant to strangle me just now. Irene shoved Uriel away with everything she had, then bolted, scrambling for her life, leaving the future tyrant standing dazed in the middle of the room. Uriel didn't give chase. He simply bent down to pick up the bottle of medicine. His gaze thoughtful, tinged with mockery. She brought medicine for me? How laughable. Ever since I was born, the thing I've received the most of has been baseless malice. And unconditional kindness? Uriel gripped the bottle tightly. If such a thing as unconditional kindness truly existed in this world, it would surely be a trap. The expensive bottle shattered, purple liquid trickling through the cracks between his fingers, carrying away the last of Irene's fragile hope, crushed without mercy. As for Irene, she ran for her life all the way out to the garden, sobbing bitterly with frustration as she ran. "You idiot, you're such a colossal idiot. Hurting yourself just to have an excuse to bring him medicine, and in the end you nearly got strangled for it. What an ungrateful tyrant," she kicked furiously at the trunk of a tree, then immediately sat down, clutching her foot and sobbing. Even the tree's ganging up to bully me now. While she sat there nursing her foot, a tattered kite came falling out of nowhere, landing with a thud right in front of Irene. And as if the scene had been staged in advance, the perfect trio of Lucia, Jason, and Arwen came running over from a distance. Seeing the torn kite in Irene's hands, Lucia, the White Lotus, instantly switched into victim mode. She covered her mouth, murmuring bashfully, "Sister Irene, I know you hate me, but doing something like this is really going too far." Needless to say, second brother Arwen instantly bristled like an angry hedgehog, pointing straight at his own sister and unleashing a torrent of scolding. Well done, Irene. Couldn't have it, so you just tore it apart, is that it? This is exactly why brother Jason never bothers buying you gifts. Beside him, Jason busied himself gently wiping away his cousin's tears, promising to buy her another one. Neither of her own blood brothers bothered to ask Irene a single question, or wonder why she was sitting on the ground with red, swollen eyes. Wrongfully accused while already at her emotional breaking point, Irene's patience officially snapped. Her gaze went dark. You dare provoke me right now? Fine then. Don't any of you come to regret this. Just because a torn kite happened to fall on her, Irene had suddenly become the villain in her own brother's eyes. Hiding behind them, Lucia, the White Lotus, curled her lips into a smug smirk. In this household, the real power beneath the Duke belonged to Jason and Arwen. As long as Lucia could manipulate the two of them, she'd have nothing to fear. Through the most despicable schemes, she would slowly isolate Irene, eating away at this family from the inside. And in the end, all that would remain of this once perfect family portrait would be Lucia herself, standing atop the ashes of the Ashburn family. Without giving Irene a chance to explain even a word, Arwen pointed straight at his own sister's face, hurling the cruelest insults he could muster. Look in a mirror, your face is twisted with jealousy. You really are a disgrace to this family. I could never accept someone like you as my sister. Jason spoke up in alarm to stop him. Arwen, you've gone too far. But spilled water can't be scooped back up. The words struck like daggers straight into her heart. Irene let out a small laugh. Condemning me as guilty without even checking the facts. If a stranger looked at this scene, they'd surely think we were enemies, not family at all. Just a few fake tears and you all fell for it so easily, barking like a pack of rabid dogs. Having men like you as brothers, that's the real disgrace. The words landed like a slap from heaven, leaving Arwen speechless, eyes wide with fury. Jason, meanwhile, stood completely stunned. In Jason's memory, no matter how badly she was treated, the Irene of the past always forced a smile, endured, and tried to please them. She had once desperately clung to even the cheapest scraps of family affection. But in this moment, the look in Irene's eyes as she gazed at them was utterly empty, cold and distant, as if looking at complete strangers. I'm sorry, but I'm not kind enough to keep silently enduring humiliation from people like you. Without another wasted word, Irene grabbed both ends of the kite. With a sharp rip, the sound of tearing cloth cut through the stillness. She tore the kite clean in half right before the three of them's stunned eyes. She gently tossed the torn pieces onto the grass at their feet. Flipping her hair, Irene delivered one final devastatingly cool line. Now we're even. Irene's proud silhouette faded away behind the trees, leaving Arwen behind, stammering, unable to comprehend what had just happened. And leaving Jason standing frozen to the spot, lost in a storm of tangled thoughts. After that whole scene, Irene wandered through the garden, letting out one long, weary sigh after another. Living under the guise of the #1 villainess was exhausting. Reassessing her current situation, Irene realized just how precarious her position really was. Her two powerful brothers were blindly devoted to Lucia's side, no matter what. The maids in the house went pale with fear the moment they saw her face, avoiding her like the plague. Her only real support right now was probably Lady Melinda, but even she was caught in the middle, unable to shield Irene at every turn. So what about the one who held the family's ultimate power, Duke Ashburn himself? In the original novel, The Tyrant's Path, Duke Ashburn was portrayed as an extraordinarily skilled and powerful politician. With his exceptional business acumen, he had brought enormous wealth to the Orby Pro Empire. Trading money for trust, he had climbed to his current position and earned the nickname the Emperor's Wallet. Would a heavyweight figure like that become a solid shield protecting Irene, or the sharp blade that would ruthlessly end her? Whatever the case, if she wanted to survive, winning over this duke was a necessary step. No sooner had she thought it than Irene decided to go see him right away, but the trouble was she had no idea what excuse to use to visit him. While she was still racking her brain over it, Irene suddenly came to a halt. Up ahead, the maid Nora was busy trimming rose branches. Seeing her lady's figure suddenly appear, Nora jumped in fright, letting out a shriek before clutching her chest, gasping for breath. Lady Irene, you nearly scared my heart right out of my chest. Looking at the bundle of deep red roses in Nora's hands, Irene asked curiously about them. It turned out that, seeing the roses in the garden blooming so beautifully, Nora had wanted to bring some in to decorate her lady's room. I was hoping the scent of these flowers might soothe your heart, even just a little. That sincere remark struck straight at Irene's heart, softening her gaze. She reached out and gently took a vivid red rose branch, breaking into a dazzling smile, so lovely it took the breath away. "Thank you. I really do love roses." Not stopping there, Irene added softly, "Nora, could I ask you for a favor?" Early the next morning, an elegant carriage rolled out of the Duke's estate. Inside, Irene and Nora sat side by side. The atmosphere between mistress and maid no longer held the fear and hesitation of before. Irene smiled quietly, instructing Nora to keep the fragrant contents of the wicker basket a secret. Watching her lady's gentle smile, Nora blushed, her face turning red as she thought to herself, "Lady Irene has gotten so kind lately." Just then, the coachman's voice called in from outside. "Sir Knight, are we ready to depart?" Hearing the words "Sir Knight," curiosity stirred within her. Irene sneakily lifted the carriage's window curtain, poking her head out to see who exactly would be escorting her this time. And there, the smile on Irene's lips froze solid, her eyes going wide. A figure sitting steady atop a black warhorse right beside the carriage window. That sharp, angular, cold face. Those deep, dark eyes so razor-sharp could belong to none other than Uriel. What in the world is this? Why is this man here of all people? The memory of that huge hand tightening around her neck in the hallway the other day came rushing back, sending a chill down Irene's spine and cold sweat beading on her skin. She cleared her throat, trying to hold on to the composure of a proper young lady, and ordered, "I don't need a night escort. You may return." But Uriel remained perfectly seated on his horse, delivering an answer so flawless there was no way to argue with it. "My lady gave instructions that whenever Lady Irene goes out, she must have a night escort. If you're unhappy about it, please take it up with the lady herself." With that, Uriel gave a sidelong glance, tossing out a loaded question. "Or perhaps, does my presence make you uncomfortable somehow?" He couldn't understand it. That day, he had clearly threatened her, even let his murderous intent show. And yet from that day to this, she hadn't punished him at all, nor breathed a word of it to anyone. Just what was this woman scheming? As for Irene, faced with Uriel's stubborn resolve, she had no choice but to angrily yank the curtain shut and slump back into her seat. He had nearly strangled me once, and now he's acting all calm like nothing happened. I truly cannot understand this man. I am officially no longer a fan. I don't admire him anymore. Outside, the carriage began rolling forward. It made its way toward Tesfino, a slum district sitting right within the Duke's own territory. Looking out the window, Irene immediately recognized this familiar setting from the novel. This place had once served as a refuge for countless foreign refugees fleeing the flames of war, and had gradually devolved into a complicated area, sprawling beyond anyone's control. Recalling the plot, Irene knew that her father, the Duke, had used this troublesome slum as a bargaining chip in a deal with Count Morris, trading it for the lucrative Hyde gold port. Suddenly, from within an alley, a scrawny little boy, ragged and clutching a stale piece of bread, came bolting straight out into the main road. Behind him, a shopkeeper chased after him, cursing loudly, and the boy stumbled, crashing straight into Irene's carriage. The carriage horse startled at the sudden obstacle, letting out a shrill neigh and rearing up on its front legs. The coachman lost his balance, tumbling off onto the ground, the reins slipping from his hands. The horse, wild and out of control, its massive iron hooves about to come crashing straight down on the boy curled up on the ground. Inside the carriage, the sudden jolt threw Irene forward, and the maid Nora barely managed to scream and lunge to catch her mistress. "The horse has gone mad, run, kid!" people shouted in desperate panic. Death was mere inches away from the boy. Right then, a dark figure leapt down from the horse's back, cutting through the wind, and in a flash had seized hold of the reins. With overwhelming physical strength and the refined skill of a top-tier knight, Uriel wrenched the massive beast down, forcing it to submit just centimeters from the boy. Under Uriel's steady, soothing hand, the white horse stood obediently still. Inside the carriage cabin, Irene let out a breath, her whole body going limp. Beside her, the maid Nora had already burst into tears from sheer fright. Looking out the window, Irene's gaze settled on Uriel's back. She couldn't believe Uriel had actually saved her. She blushed without meaning to. From within the alley, the portly bread shopkeeper pinned all the blame on the boy. All of this happened because of that little thief's stolen goods. The boy stubbornly argued back, "I didn't steal anything. I traded fair and square. Don't you dare slander me." Hearing this, the shopkeeper grew even more furious. He roared that the boy had dared to trade a worthless rock for bread. But the boy stood firm, his eyes fierce with conviction as he defended his treasure. It's not worthless. It's a treasure blessed by the gods. It can even catch fire. The shopkeeper raised his hand, ready to strike the boy to reclaim the loaf of bread now crushed flat on the ground. But a clear, commanding voice rang out. "I'll pay for that loaf of bread." Irene stepped down from the carriage, her dignified, aristocratic bearing silencing the entire crowd. Even Uriel glanced over, watching her silently. Irene turned to Nora and gave a subtle signal. Understanding her mistress's intent, Nora pulled out a gold coin and handed it to the shopkeeper. Receiving this windfall, the man beamed, bowing over and over in gratitude for the beautiful lady's kindness. Having dealt with the shopkeeper, Irene turned her attention to the boy from the Borson tribe. Despite having just been rescued, the boy still bristled defensively, backing away warily. "I'm not thanking you. I didn't do anything wrong in the first place." Watching the boy pick the bread back up off the ground to eat it, her heart clenched suddenly, and she pulled out a soft, fragrant sweet pastry. Smiling as she said, "Eat this instead. It's really sweet." The boy froze, his round eyes blinking at the radiant, warm smile of the lady before him. Then his mouth watered as he stared at the pastry in front of him. And without a word, he suddenly snatched the pastry from her hand, clutching it tightly and darting off into the crowd. Watching this, Irene laughed through gritted teeth. "Haha, what an energetic kid." Then she turned on her heel and headed back to the carriage with Nora, continuing on their way. Uriel glanced at her, his mind full of suspicion. Irene Ashburn. Was what just happened yet another performance of hers, or was it? Meanwhile, in a hidden corner of the alley, the boy from the Borson tribe slowly stepped out. He looked down, staring intently at the black, rough stone clutched tightly in his hand. Would that woman actually believe what he'd told her? The carriage finally rolled to a stop in front of the Desvino estate. Sitting in the luxurious parlor, Irene had already drained 2 full pots of tea. 30 long minutes had ticked by with no sign of the Duke, and Irene let out a sigh, her eyes downcast. It seemed the Duke truly didn't care about his daughter at all. Just as her patience was about to run out entirely, the door finally opened. But the man who walked in wasn't her father. It was a man with an incredibly bright smile, Beau Flores. Though in the novel he was just a faint, minor background character, in the present, Beau was Duke Ashburn's most trusted right-hand man. He bowed, smiling with his eyes crinkled, apologizing for keeping the lady waiting so long, and announced that today he would be the one listening to her request on the Duke's behalf. Hearing this, Irene laughed coldly to herself, making her wait until her neck ached, only to send a subordinate to deal with her, exactly as she'd predicted. She rose with graceful poise, smiling calmly. "It's fine. I wasn't in any hurry anyway." This unusually calm attitude threw Beau off for a moment. He asked curiously why the eldest daughter had gone through the trouble of coming all the way to this remote place. Irene motioned for the maid Nora to step forward. "I heard Father's been so busy lately he hasn't had time to come home, so I brought him some sweets." Nora immediately seized the opportunity, transforming into an enthusiastic PR agent for her mistress. She eagerly showed off that these were rose madeleines, a masterpiece personally conceived by Lady Irene herself. The perfect blend of buttery richness and fragrant rose aroma, truly a miracle. Watching Nora's praise soar higher and higher, Beau was left completely speechless. He gushed over the brilliant idea and promised he would personally deliver it straight to the Duke. Having achieved her goal of planting some goodwill, Irene politely excused herself so as not to disturb her father's work. But the moment Irene's figure disappeared behind the door, the playful smile on Beau's face vanished instantly. In its place was a sharp, calculating look. She left without throwing a fit or demanding anything at all. Strange. I deliberately hid the Duke from her and made her wait here as a test. And yet she didn't kick up a fuss like she used to. What on earth had happened to Lady Irene? Though his mind was full of question marks, his appetite ultimately won out over reason. Beau practically sprouted an extra pair of legs, happily skipping off with the basket of pastries in tow. At the same time, in his study, Duke Raymond Ashburn was under enormous stress. A subordinate was reporting on a lucrative deal. Count Morris wanted to trade the bustling Hyde Port for the Tesfino slum. A windfall dropped straight from the sky, and yet the shrewd, calculating Duke still furrowed his brow, lost in thought. The stifling silence was suddenly broken by the loud crash of a door opening. Beau bounced in, swinging the wicker basket. announcing crisply that it was time for tea and showing off his prize, a gift from Lady Irene. Hearing this name, the Duke exclaimed in surprise. Irene made the trip all the way to Tesfino? Strange, that girl always insists she'll never set foot in this place because it's too filthy. The wicker basket full of rose madeleines was opened up. The Duke reached in and picked up a small pastry, slowly bringing it to his mouth for a taste. Instantly, a sweet flavor washed over him, carrying with it an incredibly familiar scent, and the powerful Duke's gaze softened just slightly. His daughter, who was always so stubborn, always so quick to anger, had now gone out of her way to bring him pastries all this distance. Just what on earth has happened at home while I've been away? Seeing this rare display of concern from his master, Beau smiled gently and offered a soft suggestion. If you're worried, why not go see for yourself? It's been quite a while since you've been home after all. Hearing this, the Duke gave a slight nod. Perhaps it was time he took another look at his daughter. Night fell, blanketing the Ashburn estate. Under the hazy moonlight, Irene and her maid strolled back toward her room, with Uriel following close behind. At the door, Irene spoke up gently. That's enough of the night watch for today, you may go. On the outside, she carried herself with full authority, but inside, her heart was screaming in fear. His knees were still injured from that night kneeling in the rain. If I keep pushing him to overwork himself like this, the wound will only get worse. And one fine day, he'll come at me overflowing with resentment and chop my head clean off. Uriel bowed his head coldly, obeying the order. And just as he turned to walk away, Irene suddenly seemed to remember something. She quickly called out, "Wait a moment." And with that, she scurried into her room in a flash. Uriel stood frozen at the door, his expression full of confusion. But just a moment later, Irene came back out, carrying a silver plate with a few dainty rose madeleines on it. She held the plate out toward him, cheeks flushing slightly, clearing her throat awkwardly. "This is to thank you for saving me this morning." Uriel stared at the plate in stunned silence, opening his mouth to decline, "I don't." But before the words could leave his lips, a sudden night breeze swept past. Irene's fiery red hair fluttered in the wind, carrying with it a faint fragrance that brushed past Uriel's nose. It was the scent of roses, a gentle, soft aroma, pure, just like the pastries resting in her hand right now. Being stared at so intently only made Irene more flustered. She hastily shoved the plate straight into Uriel's hands, stammering an excuse to cover it. "It's getting cold out. You should hurry home too." With that, she quickly slammed the door shut, leaving Uriel standing frozen alone in the windswept hallway. He looked down at the small pastries in his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Uriel slowly brought one up and took a bite. The rich, buttery flavor blended with the scent of roses, spreading across his tongue. His usually cold gaze seemed to soften just a touch. So this is what rose tastes like. A bit too sweet for me. Inside the dark room, Uriel stood in silence, his gaze fixed on the plate of rose madeleines on the table, his brow furrowed slightly. Irene Ashburn, just what on earth are you scheming? He could sense clearly that the present-day Irene was completely different. That usual arrogant, domineering air had vanished without a trace, replaced instead by words and actions of a strangely, unusually kind person. And yet, woven through that kindness, every so often she deliberately let slip a rather forced, overbearing side. It felt exactly like she was performing in a play. A flapping sound broke through Uriel's tangled train of thought. He stepped over and threw the window wide open, and a powerful black eagle swooped down, landing neatly on his sleeve. Uriel untied a small note carefully hidden beneath the bird's leg. On it was written only a single line, the Rosarawell base. His gaze immediately turned grim, mocking himself for wasting time speculating about the intentions of some woman who meant nothing. Uriel wrapped himself in his black hooded cloak, melting into the shadows. "I still have more important matters to attend to." Back in her room, the maid Nora sat nibbling on the last of the madeleines. Her cheeks puffed out as she chewed away happily. Sitting beside her, watching the maid enjoy her food, Irene smiled contentedly, then rested her chin in her hand with a sigh. All this sweet food these past few days is starting to make me sick of it. Suddenly, I'm craving something hot, sukiyaki, fried cutlet, or maybe a cream stew. Hearing her lady wanted something hot, Nora immediately had an idea. She raised a finger, excitedly suggesting, "There's fresh cow's milk down in the kitchen. Let me go make you some rice pudding. Just wait a moment for me, my lady," and with that, Nora dashed off like a gust of wind. Watching the little maid's retreating figure, Irene chuckled softly. In this cold, lonely estate, Nora's warmth was truly precious. The room fell quiet as Irene stepped out onto the balcony, the night breeze gently tousling her fiery red hair. The sky tonight was clear, countless stars glittering like diamonds scattered across a black velvet blanket. Gazing up at this unfamiliar sky, dormant memories stirred within her, the sudden death, the bewildering rebirth. I was thrown into a world from a novel that I seem to know, and yet somehow I know nothing about it at all. But here there's Uriel. There's the Duchess who always shelters me so gently. I don't feel any lingering attachment to my old world anymore, that place where no one ever loved me at all. She knew that life in this novel's world was incredibly harsh and dangerous, and she couldn't predict what terrible things might be waiting for her ahead. And yet, the corner of Irene's mouth curved into a beautiful smile, because the stars here really were breathtaking. That moment, unbeknownst to her, caught Uriel's eye. Irene Ashburn, just who is the real person underneath it all? In the kitchen of the Ashburn estate, the atmosphere was tense once again. The servants aligned with the gold digger faction were whispering the most venomous remarks to each other. Nora's request for warm milk was flatly cast aside. One arrogant maid declared that they served the Ashburn family, not Irene personally. Rather than worry that Irene might retaliate, she just sneered, arms crossed, brimming with smugness. The Ashburn family is about to belong to Lady Lucia soon anyway. That woman's nothing but someone society has already cast aside. Once Lady Lucia marries either the eldest or second young master, she'll only be fit to pick up Lady Lucia's leftovers. No different from a stray dog, the maid boasted smugly about having shrewdly picked the winning side to serve. But these ignorant servants had no idea that Lucia, the white lily they worshipped, had just gone through quite a scare of her own. The torn kite incident that afternoon had left a serious crack in her facade. Confronting Lucia, Jason for the first time looked at her with genuine suspicion. "Tell me the truth, Lucia. Did Irene really tear that kite?" Lucia was stunned for a moment, but her acting skills had reached master level. She burst into tears at once, sobbing and putting on a look of boundless self-pity. "It's probably because Sister Irene hates me for how close we've gotten. She's ruined my things before, too. This was probably the same." Needless to say, second brother Arwen, as if under a spell, immediately jumped up shouting, "Brother Jason, have you lost your mind? You know exactly how deceitful Irene is. Why would you go doubting innocent Lucia instead?" Seeing the two brothers at odds, Lucia cried and begged them not to fight over her, promising she'd apologize to Irene as many times as it took. This tactic of retreating to advance struck right at Jason's conscience, leaving him feeling deeply guilty. He stroked her hair, awkwardly promising to buy her another kite. Lucia beamed with a radiant smile of thanks. But the instant she turned her back, that smile twisted instantly into something chillingly sinister. Though the matter had been smoothed over, this was the first time Jason had ever doubted her. "Irene, to me, you're nothing but a stepping stone. One day this entire ducal family will belong to me, Lucia Ashburn." Just then, a maid brought over the cup of warm milk and asked her what to do with it. Since this milk had originally been requested by Irene from the kitchen, but they'd secretly kept it back. Looking at the steaming cup of milk, Lucia's gaze darkened, and she gave a soft, cruel laugh. "I don't want this. Isn't there a stray dog kept over at the stables? Give it to that." Meanwhile, Nora returned to the room empty-handed, sobbing quietly. The little maid cried and cried, blaming herself for being useless, for failing to bring the warm milk back for her lady, completely letting her mistress down. Watching Nora's pitiful, tearful state, Irene, far from getting angry, couldn't help but laugh softly. She patted her gently. "It's all right, don't cry anymore, this isn't your fault, it's mine." Nora wiped her tears, looking up to ask, "So what should we do about this? Give them a good whipping? Or should we go tear up the whole kitchen?" Picturing the image Nora had painted in her head, a villainous Irene wielding a whip against the servants, demolishing the kitchen, Irene could only laugh awkwardly, breaking into a cold sweat. It seemed in these people's eyes she really was some kind of violent monster. Using brute force to vent right now would be easy, but it wouldn't do a single thing to strengthen her position. "I know full well who's pulling the strings behind this and what she wants from me. If I lose my temper and punish those maids, that means I've fallen completely into Lucia's trap." Irene's eyes hardened, the corner of her mouth curling into a dangerous smile. "If these foolish servants who love leaning on someone else's power need a lesson, I'll give them one. Power so easily gained by clinging to someone else can just as easily be stripped away." She sent Nora off to rest and stood by the window, gazing out into the night. Irene knew the real show was only just beginning. Meanwhile, Uriel crossed through dense, tangled forests, pressing deep into the towering, frigid Rosarawell Mountains. His destination was a secret military base tucked away in a snow-covered valley. Under the pale moonlight, Uriel stood atop a high cliff, casting his gaze down at the formidable army gathered below. Savino stepped up behind him, reporting with evident pride, "These 7,000 soldiers represent the entirety of the forces we've managed to gather so far." Choosing this harsh Rosarawell range as a base was truly a wise decision to stay hidden from the enemy's eyes. This mountain range, though treacherous and brutally cold, held an incredibly vital strategic position. If they could just get past those snow-capped peaks, their army would have a direct path straight into the heart of the capital. Uriel's eyes blazed like a torch in the darkness. A bloody battle was inevitable. These 7,000 souls here were the last remnants, people who had chosen to stand shoulder to shoulder, willing to lay down their very lives for one single ideal, to overthrow the tyrant sitting on the throne and restore the glorious honor of the Gallerini family. But Savino let out a soft sigh, his voice betraying deep worry. But to wage war, we need an enormous supply of resources and funding. With our current food stores, maintaining even bare minimum living conditions is already difficult. How will we survive this brutal winter? Winter is drawing very near. The snow is falling thicker by the day. The bone-chilling cold of the Rosarawell range could kill off their army before swords ever even clash. Uriel remained silent, deep in thought, his eyes fixed on the distance, where snowflakes were racing each other to the ground. The steady back of their leader seemed to be carrying an invisible, crushing weight. The next morning, at the estate's training grounds, the ear-splitting clang of clashing metal stopped Irene and Nora in their tracks along the corridor. The male lead Uriel was in a sparring match with a knight named Jack. Jack charged in with rapid, ferocious attacks, his sword swinging with fury and force. But in contrast to his opponent's impatience, Uriel remained perfectly calm. He glided effortlessly, dodging and parrying every strike with flawless precision, not a scratch on him. In the blink of an eye, one powerful sword strike knocked Jack's weapon flying into the air. The blade clattered to the ground, and before Jack could even regain his footing, Uriel's cold blade was already pointed straight at his face. "You've lost." The surrounding knights broke into murmurs. One of them stepped forward to scold Uriel for going too hard on a fellow knight. But Uriel simply replied coldly, "That's the result of challenging someone without knowing your own limits." Humiliated in front of everyone, Jack seethed with fury, but he quickly twisted his lips into a crooked smile. "Diane von Bessel, I know your secret now. The real reason a man with your kind of skill would settle for being a knight bodyguard to this ducal family is because you're plotting something else entirely, aren't you?" A cold, murderous glint instantly flared in Uriel's eyes. Watching from a distance, Irene grew anxious. Had someone discovered the male lead's true identity? It turned out that late the night before, Jack, having had too much beer, had stumbled off in search of the bathroom. In his tipsy haze, he'd accidentally spotted a figure cloaked in black, sneaking through the estate's corridors. And that figure had been none other than Diane. Back in the present, Jack raised his voice threateningly, accusing Diane of secretly stealing from the Duke's treasury and hiding it in his own room. Both Uriel and Irene froze. He pointed a challenging finger at Diane, declaring he would report the whole matter to Lady Irene to have him thrown out of the Ashburn family. Jack laughed loudly, taunting him with the miserable fate awaiting a knight discarded by nobility. But before Jack's arrogant smile could even fade, a cold voice cut through the air, icy and sharp, slicing through the silence from behind. And exactly what is supposed to happen to him? Irene's sudden appearance stunned every knight on the training grounds. She strode forward slowly, arms crossed with pride. "It was I who assigned Diane to the night watch yesterday. Or do I owe you a report on that too?" Irene's words landed on Jack like a bucket of ice water to the face. The smugness on his expression vanished instantly, replaced by panic, his mouth fumbling wordlessly. "But my lady..." Irene took a step closer, breaking into a bright, sweetly innocent smile. "You seem awfully worried about Diane, don't you?" But in the very next second, her smile vanished. Irene reached up to toy idly with a lock of her hair, delivering a veiled threat. "If you care about him so much, then why don't you become my slave in his place instead?" The word slave, coming from the villainous Irene's mouth, made Jack's heart stop. He broke into a cold sweat, his face drained of all color. Jack, utterly terrified, immediately dropped to his knees, trembling as he begged, "Please spare me, my lady, please forgive me." Watching the man who'd been so arrogant moments ago now groveling at her feet, Irene turned coldly and walked away. Ha, how boring. She flicked her hair calmly, waving Diane, who stood stunned behind her, forward. "What are you standing there for? Come with me." Uriel flinched slightly, then bowed his head respectfully. "As you command, my lady." Watching Irene's proud back, he thought to himself, "My lady really is one of a kind." Meanwhile, walking beside them, the maid Nora was seething with jealousy, afraid this newly arrived guard would steal her spot as the trusted confidant. Leaving the training grounds, Irene glanced sideways at Uriel, walking silently behind her. She knew full well he'd infiltrated as a guard for his own hidden agenda, but seeing him get bullied by the other knights like that had left her unable to just stand by. After all, the original Irene was the true root cause of all this trouble. It's true I nearly died at his hands once, but then he saved my life afterward. So we're even now. And not to mention, in my past life, I was Uriel's #1 diehard fan. How could I possibly just stand there and watch my idol get bullied? Irene cleared her throat, casually probing. From what I understand, knight bodyguards earn quite a decent salary. You'd have plenty to live comfortably outside, so why do you keep sticking around the knight's dormitory? Uriel paused for a moment, then suddenly broke into a bright smile, warm as a spring breeze, and answered, "Because this way I can rush to Lady Irene's side at any moment." Watching the male lead's fake saccharine smile, Irene got goosebumps all over, laughing wryly to herself. If he lived outside, no one could keep track of his movements. The fact that he's willing to stay here proves there's some scheme he hasn't finished yet. Irene turned to Nora and gave a firm order. "Clear out the empty room at the end of the first floor. From now on, Diane will move in there." Nora's jaw nearly hit the floor. She shrieked, "Living in the same building as my lady?" "Oh no, my lady. He's a man, and all men are beasts." Irene waved her hand helplessly at her little maid's overactive imagination. "It's just the same building, not the same room. Why are you panicking so much?" To stamp out everyone's suspicions, Irene immediately put on her usual domineering face, smirking with sly mischief. "Besides, if he lives here, I can order him around whenever I please. Isn't that right?" Uriel bowed his head, his voice low, masking the turmoil in his heart. "I obey your every command, my lady." One pleasant morning in the garden, the air was warm, but thick with false pretense all the same. Lucia was presenting Lady Melinda with a hand-embroidered handkerchief, skillfully bragging that she'd scented it with the freesia fragrance the lady loved most. Lady Melinda smiled gently and praised her, making Lucia swell with pride. But her joy was quickly snuffed out the moment Irene arrived, dressed in a stunning golden gown like a ray of dawn. Lady Melinda happily took her hand, inviting her to sit down for tea. Watching this scene unfold, the smile on Lucia's lips froze instantly, her eyes betraying a flash of hatred. Before Lucia could even attempt her tricks, Irene bluntly ignored her presence entirely. She clasped Lady Melinda's hand tightly, speaking in a coaxing tone. "Mother, actually, there's something incredibly important I need to discuss with you privately. Could we perhaps talk alone for a moment?" Lady Melinda happily agreed, advising Lucia to go rest inside first. Though furious enough to see red, Lucia had no choice but to swallow her anger. Smiling as if she agreed, she gripped her handkerchief so tightly it crumpled entirely, teeth clenched. "That brat is planning to tattle about yesterday, isn't she? Since when did a foolish, selfish girl like Irene learn to scheme like this? If I let her be alone with the lady, things will turn against me for sure. I need to go find him right away." While Lucia scrambled to find an ally. Over in the tea room, Lady Melinda gently asked Irene about the important matter she wanted to discuss. Irene stated it plainly, "I want to learn how to manage the household." This sudden request left Lady Melinda utterly astonished, unable to believe her own ears. To convince the woman before her, Irene poured out her heartfelt words. "Up until now, I've always been a spoiled, willful child, only ever tarnishing this family's reputation. It's only natural everyone resents me, but I don't want to live like that anymore. From now on, I want to change and do everything I can to help everyone. Please believe me, Mother." Inside her head, she was running through some incredibly shrewd calculations of a modern-day mind. To change her current situation, she first had to rebuild her image within the family. Winning Lady Melinda's absolute support would be an enormous advantage. Moreover, if she kept the original owner's spoiled villainous persona intact, sooner or later someone would notice the soul inside had been swapped. Rather than live in constant fear, why not simply rewrite the character herself? That was surely the smartest move in this game of survival. Irene's sincerity, combined with the resolve in her eyes, completely touched Lady Melinda's heart. She smiled gently, squeezing Irene's small hands tightly. "Of course, I will support you with everything I have. Come here." Lady Melinda wrapped her arms around Irene's shoulders, handing her a stack of household management documents, smiling affectionately. "If there's anything you don't understand, I'll teach you. Just do whatever you truly want to do." Irene was deeply moved by her mother's generosity. She pored over the documents for hours on end, burying herself in the ledgers until her neck ached with exhaustion. But looking at the results, the corner of Irene's mouth curved up with satisfaction. "I've finally found a loophole in all this paperwork I can use." Gathering up the documents to bring back to her room, the moment she stepped through the door, Irene ran straight into Nora and Diane. It turned out the young man had just finished setting up his new room and had come to report to her. Seeing the heavy stack of documents in Irene's arms, Diane stepped closer, reaching out to help carry some of the load. Seeing his hand reach out, Irene's heart skipped a beat. Her man-crazy brain kicked into overdrive. A vision flashed through her mind of the two of them walking hand in hand down the aisle, holding the wedding of the century, and even holding their own child together in their arms. So, blushing bashfully, she placed her hand on top of his, not daring to look him in the eye, her face flushed as red as a pomegranate. Diane, flustered, explained, "I just wanted to carry your things for you." Oh my goodness, this massive misunderstanding left Irene so embarrassed, she wanted nothing more than to find a hole and crawl into it right that instant. Without a word, she spun around, her mind screaming, what on earth did I just do? This is so embarrassing, what were you even thinking, Irene? Watching her reaction, an unconscious smile crept across Diane's usually cold face. Then, seeming to catch himself, he raised a hand to cover his mouth, hiding his own reddening cheeks. Jessica Winton, one of Irene's close maids, notorious for bullying the weak, and flattering the powerful to secure her own position. Her greatest dream was to climb her way up to head chef, which was why she'd always tried her hardest to win Irene's favor. But these past 2 days had felt like a nightmare for her, watching the maid Nora, a girl she'd always looked down on, suddenly become the lady's favorite. Jessica seethed, waiting eagerly for a chance to prove her own worth. Having read Jessica's ambition perfectly, Irene smiled sweetly, handing her an important task. "I've been thinking about this for a while now. You're diligent, loyal, and highly capable. I know you'll handle this task brilliantly. Isn't that right, Jessica?" Flattered to the heavens, Jessica was overjoyed, immediately bowing her head and vowing to give it her all to prove worthy of her lady's trust. The foolish maid had no idea she had just willingly turned herself into a sharp blade in Irene's hand. Back in the conversation with Lady Melinda in the study, she looked at Irene gently and offered, "I heard about what happened in the kitchen last night. If you'd like, I can punish them on your behalf." But Irene tactfully declined, wanting to handle it herself so as not to trouble her mother any further. Her back straight, her gaze proud, fixed on the vast sky beyond the window. "If I truly want to change the Ashburn family's future, I can't stay forever as a fledgling sheltered beneath my parents' wings. I'll turn every hardship and challenge in my path into nourishment to grow stronger, sharpening my own claws. And one day I'll fly high on my own, leave this place, and see the vast world out there for myself." Meanwhile, down in the kitchen, the maid Pamela was still gossiping away happily, relieved she hadn't been punished by Irene over the warm milk incident the night before. Feeling smug, she urged the other maids to stay loyal to Lucia, promising they'd be promoted to head chef eventually. But before Pamela's smile could even fade, she found herself flat on the ground, food dumped all over her head, to the shock of the surrounding maids. Jessica crossed her arms over her chest, declaring smugly, "I already suspected the food in the storeroom was disappearing far too fast. So it was you all sneaking food this whole time." Pamela's face went pale as she tried to argue her way out. But before she could finish, Jessica pulled out a sheet of paper and began crisply reciting the servant's code of conduct that Irene had just taught her. Article 9. Anyone who abuses their position for personal gain will be dismissed. Article 13. False reporting is punishable by 30 lashes. Article 16. Accepting bribes results in the loss of both hands. What do you think your fate will be, Pamela? Pamela panicked, wailing as she tried to run off to find Lucia for help. But the moment she turned, Jessica clamped a hand over her mouth. Haven't you learned your lesson yet? Leaning on a little borrowed power and thinking you're untouchable. A lowly wretch like you has no right to defy Lady Irene. Better save your strength, you'll need it for all the screaming later. Meanwhile, out in the garden, Nora was marveling over the juicy news from the kitchen. Oh my gosh, I can't believe Pamela was that vicious. Compared to her, Jessica's really something else, but she's terrifying when she gets angry. Irene smiled, thinking to herself that Nora and Jessica actually had quite similar personalities when it came to handling trouble. Just then, Jessica walked over and bowed her head to report. My lady, I've completed the task splendidly. Irene smiled with satisfaction. I knew I'd chosen the right person. She leaned back in her chair, letting out a breath of pure relief. The first battle had ended in a resounding victory. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Lucia was pacing anxiously in her room. She kept biting her nails, terrified Irene would tattle to Lady Melinda about last night's incident. Just then, the eldest son Jason arrived back at the mansion. Lucia, like a drowning woman grabbing a lifeline, rushed straight out. Brother Jason. She immediately put on a pitiful act, shifting all the blame onto the servants to dodge responsibility. Last night I was hungry, so I asked for a late-night snack. I had absolutely no idea the maids had taken Sister Irene's milk without permission to give to me. What if Aunt Melinda hears about this and misunderstands? Moved by his cousin's tears, Jason softened, readily promising to explain things to Lady Melinda himself. Lucia rejoiced inwardly, certain that Jason would always be on her side. But her joy hadn't even had time to bloom before Jason's next words left her frozen in place. However, the servants who made that mistake still need to be properly punished. Lucia's expression instantly changed. She knew full well, if the people loyal to her got punished, the entire ducal household would see her as having no real power at all. She absolutely could not let that happen. Swallowing her trembling nerves, Lucia quickly wrapped her arms around Jason's arm, pleading sweetly, punishing them over something this minor seems awfully harsh. Why not just transfer them to be my personal maids instead? That way, if I get hungry, it'll be easy to ask for help, and Sister Irene won't have to worry about them anymore either. But in response to that sweet plea, Jason's gaze turned cold and unnervingly stern. If you need a maid who can cook, I'll find you someone else. But anyone who dares disrespect Irene absolutely cannot go unpunished. Lucia's hand clenched the hem of her dress, trembling. That's right, Jason had ironclad principles he'd never break, not even for her. To preserve Jason's trust, Lucia had no choice but to swallow her feelings and force out a resigned smile. If that's what you've decided, brother, I understand. Jason's expression softened, and he said fondly, Good, I'm glad you understand. By the way, I bought you a little gift. I've had it sent to your room already. Lucia instantly lit up with joy. But the moment Jason turned his back, the smile on her lips vanished immediately. On her way back to her room, Lucia's obedient mask completely shattered. Damn it all. Irene, you're only acting up because you're relying on Melinda's protection, aren't you? I've treated her like my own mother, but in the end, blood ties are all that really matter. Is that it? Even Jason is taking her side now. Just then, a maid bowed her head slightly in greeting to Lady Lucia. But in Lucia's mind at that moment, the maid's smile twisted into a chorus of mocking voices. I hear she only owns 2 torn dresses. Ever since her stepmother had her own child, she's had nowhere to belong. She smells so strange. Look at that poor little Lucia Crawford. A stray dog the lady took pity on and picked up. Those grating whispered words felt like dark hands strangling Lucia's mind. Gasping for breath, she clutched her head with both hands, screaming in agony, No, stop looking at me like that. Ignoring the maid calling out frantically behind her, Lucia bolted frantically back to her room, slamming the door shut. Once the door was closed, Lucia's saintly mask instantly crumbled away, a wave of madness surging up as she swung her hand and delivered a brutal slap across her poor maid's face. Crack, a cry of pain rang out. Lucia gritted her teeth in fury. This is all your fault. If you just kept that filthy mouth of yours shut, things wouldn't have gotten this bad. How dare you speak my name so casually, as if you had any right? Lucia coldly ground the sharp heel of her shoe into the hand of the maid, sobbing pitifully on the floor. Tch! And without holding back a word, you carry filthy blood in your veins. Don't you dare dream of ever being a noble lady, you lowly, worthless wretch. Once she'd vented her rage, she jerked her chin, ordering the maid to get out. Left alone, Lucia's gaze fell upon an exquisite wooden box on the table, the gift Jason had sent. She opened it, and her eyes instantly lit up at the sparkling pearl necklace inside. Lucia laughed loudly, smug with delight. How gorgeous, it's 1,000 times more stunning than whatever that brat Irene received. She smugly assumed Jason still loved her the most. And with this necklace, she would be the center of attention at tomorrow's birthday party. She sneered. Irene, don't think winning once means you can just climb all over me. Someone like you doesn't even deserve to show your face at a noble gathering. But little did Lucia know, a earth-shattering surprise was waiting for Irene on the other side of the estate. Stepping into her room, Irene froze completely. Before her stood a mountain of gifts, piled high, bursting with color. Irene asked, bewildered, "What is this? Where did all these gifts come from?" Nora jumped with excitement, cheering. "Eldest young Master Jason sent them to apologize for leaving you so lonely, my lady. There are exactly 100 gifts in total. The young master must have bought out the entire shop. I counted them over and over, not off by a single one." Jessica, standing nearby, immediately shoved Nora aside, delivering another gloating blow. And guess what? Lady Lucia over there only received a single gift. It's obvious at a glance who's really the favorite in this house. Clearly, no one can easily steal my lady's position. In stark contrast to the two maids' excitement, Irene's gaze at the pile of gifts was utterly cold. She simply gave a quiet order to have them cleared away. Deep down, Irene knew, unlike Arwen, who was completely blinded by Lucia, Jason truly loved and cherished Irene from the bottom of his heart. But that deep love could never reach the girl now living inside this body. The night sky had long since fallen, but Irene was still buried at her desk, her pen racing tirelessly across the paper. She stretched out with a long, weary sigh, unable to believe the Ashburn family ran this many different business ventures. I've been reading all day, and I've barely gotten through a third of these ledgers. From mining, agriculture, livestock, to trade and even fine art dealing, there really wasn't a single sector this family hadn't dipped its hands into. Irene's head felt ready to explode from the sheer volume of numbers. Seeing her mistress exhausted, her whole body stiff from sitting so long, the maid Nora suddenly had a wonderful idea. "My lady, why don't you go down to the first-floor bath? It's fed by a natural hot spring. I guarantee all your fatigue will melt away instantly." At the words hot spring, Irene's eyes instantly lit up like 2 stars. Stepping into the bathing room, Irene couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the sheer luxury and grandeur of the place. Truly the lifestyle of the upper class, worthy of the title Emperor's Wallet. Undressing, Irene slowly stepped down into the warm water. Nora thoughtfully brought some wine and fresh fruit to help her relax. Sinking into the warm water, Irene let out a satisfied sigh. The water temperature was perfect, and there was the faint, gentle scent of premium oils the servants had thoughtfully prepared. On such a cold day as this, soaking in a hot spring was truly unbeatable. She rested her head back against the tub's edge, savoring the pleasant sensation spreading through her body, slowly drifting into a warm, hazy doze. But that peaceful atmosphere was suddenly shattered by slow footsteps approaching. A tall figure stepped into the steam-filled bathing room. Uriel sniffed the air softly, murmuring to himself, a faint scent of sulfur. So this really is a natural hot spring. This must be the place. Assuming no one else was there, Uriel slowly began undoing his white shirt, revealing a toned, muscular chest covered in battle scars, masculine and powerful. He undid his belt, removed his clothes, and stepped down into the warm water. Just then, Irene stirred awake to find the room suddenly plunged into darkness as the candles all went out. Dazed, she called out, "Nora, could you relight the candles for me?" But the moment she turned her head, her breath caught in her throat. There before her eyes stood Uriel's muscular, naked body, looming in the middle of the pool. Their eyes met in the hazy darkness. Irene's face flushed as red as a ripe pomegranate. In utter panic, she let out a piercing scream and immediately dove underwater to hide. Underwater, Irene's mind spun wildly. Why is this man Uriel here of all places? Wait, the candles are out. In this darkness, surely he can't see anything, right? Meanwhile, Uriel was equally frozen in shock. He raised a hand to cover his face, silently cursing whichever comrade had fed him false information. It turned out he'd been assured earlier that Irene never set foot anywhere near this first-floor bathing room. I really was a fool to believe that guy. Unable to hold her breath any longer, Irene surfaced, gasping heavily before snapping, You're still here? Get out right now." Uriel, flustered, apologized and moved to step out and leave. But right at that moment, the sound of the door clicking open rang out. Nora had returned with the tray of wine and fruit. Seeing the room pitch dark, Nora looked around, confused. Did the candles go out? If Nora lit the candles now, the scene of the two of them bathing together would surely be exposed. With no time to think it through, Irene reached out, grabbing Uriel's hand firmly and pulling him under the water. When he opened his eyes, Uriel found himself face to face with Irene's entire body. His whole face instantly flushed red, and he squeezed his eyes shut in a panic, turning away. This woman is truly strange. To throw Nora off, Irene tried to keep her voice as calm as possible, even though her face was burning hot. I find bathing in the dark much more relaxing, so don't light the candles, okay? I mean it. Nora, oblivious, agreed, and moved to bring the tray of fruit closer. Irene yelped in a panic. No, just leave it over there, I'll get it myself later. Underwater in the hazy dimness, Uriel turned his face away, not daring to look at Irene. Then his eyes narrowed slightly, a thought suddenly sparking in his mind. Perhaps this is my chance. Beneath the warm water, Uriel's large hand gently tightened around Irene's slender waist. She jumped, her heart racing wildly, but forced herself to keep her trembling voice steady enough to answer Nora. I'm fine, nothing's wrong here. Taking advantage of the covering darkness, Uriel slowly leaned in, closing in on her flushed face, his warm breath brushing against her as he whispered. Lady Irene, there are a few things I'd like to ask you. These past few days you've been behaving so strangely. What exactly do you want from me? A mere night bodyguard like myself, how could I possibly be of any use to you? Is this what you wanted? The distance between them was so close, Irene could see every single eyelash of his reflected in the hazy water. Her heart pounded relentlessly, as if trying to leap right out of her chest. In her past life, she had wondered countless times just what Uriel's eyes would look like. But even up until the moment she died, she never got her answer. She'd never once been able to imagine what that gaze would be like. And now, at last, she finally knew Uriel was looking at her with a gaze full of suspicion. When he looked at her like that, she felt as though she might genuinely lose her mind. The scent of roses mingling with the warm steam drew their two faces even closer together. Close enough that their lips were only a few millimeters apart, when Uriel suddenly burst out laughing and pulled back. With a quick flick of his fingers, he popped one of his shirt buttons, knocking over Nora's tray of wine and fruit to create a distraction. Nora shrieked in the darkness. What just fell? Oh gosh, it's so dark, I can't see a thing. Taking advantage of Nora being busy cleaning up the mess, Uriel snatched his clothes in a flash, slipping quietly out the door and vanishing into the quiet night. Irene was left alone in the warm, misty bathwater. Back in her bedroom, Irene was rolling around, tugging at her own hair, so mortified she felt ready to burst into flames. Thinking back to the serious expression on Uriel's face, laced through with that teasing edge from moments ago. Half embarrassed, half furious, Irene bit down on her blanket and screamed. Damn him! How dare he toy with a young woman's heart like that? What a scoundrel, looking so serious on the outside, only to turn out to be some shameless flirt who goes around teasing women. Irene sighed and buried her face in the bed. Uriel was, after all, the male lead of a novel, surrounded by countless beautiful women. There were noble ladies, a holy maiden of the state religion, an imperial princess, and Lucia too. In the story, each of them shared some special bond with him, but whether he truly loved any of them, that was something no one could say for sure. With that thought, Irene reassured herself, whatever happened just now was surely just a passing joke on his part. That's right. Stop fantasizing, Irene. Your ultimate goal is to keep your head on your shoulders and save the Ashburn family from ruin. Everything else you absolutely must not pursue. Having made up her mind, she quickly drifted off into a deep sleep. Night had fallen deep, the world settling into stillness, when suddenly a dark, hooded figure silently leapt down onto Irene's balcony. He quietly opened the window, slipping into the room like a ghost. Uriel stood silently beside the bed, gazing at her sleeping, unguarded face. His eyes turned cold, and with a decisive motion, he gently pulled aside Irene's nightgown, revealing, under the pale moonlight, a small mole on her back. Uriel's brow furrowed. That mole on her back? There's no mistaking it, this is definitely Irene Ashburn. But if this truly is Irene, why does everything feel so different? The Irene I know would never look at me the way she has been. That's not the sincere, longing gaze she's been giving me lately. Lost in thought, Irene suddenly kicked off her blanket, startling Uriel. Watching her messy sleeping habits, he couldn't help but let out a helpless smile. Uriel slowly raised his hand, letting it hover near her neck. His deep eyes glinted with a sharp, piercing look, as if trying to see straight through to the soul within. If this really is the case, then who exactly is living inside this body? The next morning, gentle sunlight spread warmly across the Duke's garden. Standing on the balcony looking down, Irene leaned lightly against the railing, breaking into a deeply satisfied smile. Down on the training grounds, Uriel was training with his sword. Sweat glistened on his toned, muscular body, his chest rising and falling with each decisive swing. Waking up to a view like this is the truth, the real happiness of being transmigrated. But down on the grounds, Uriel suddenly stopped short, a flash of pain crossing his face as he clutched his own knee. The smile on Irene's lips vanished instantly. The wound from that rainy night hadn't fully healed yet. And yet he was training this hard, this obsessively, every single day. Was he pushing himself to the absolute limit just to hasten his revenge? Watching his solitary figure, Irene sighed, her mind drifting back to the blood-soaked, tear-stained chapters of the original novel. Uriel's life story might have looked grand and thrilling to outsiders, but to him it was nothing but an unbroken chain of misfortune and suffering. And right at this very moment, he had just formed his revolutionary army. To fund his forces, he had secretly taken over the underground businesses the Gallerini family once ran, reaping enormous profits. And yet he kept not a single coin for himself, pouring every last cent into feeding his soldiers. Watching his men raise their glasses cheerfully in the tavern, while Uriel sat quietly alone in a corner, gnawing on a stale crust of bread, Irene's heart clenched. He'd once been a young lord living in luxury, and now here he was, torturing himself like this. Could she really just stand here and watch him suffer? Sitting before a lavish table piled high with delicacies, Irene still couldn't focus at all. Looking at the fragrant grilled meat before her, she set down her fork, wiped her mouth, and turned to the maid beside her. "Nora, take this food to Diane." At Uriel's room, a knock broke through the deep silence. The maid Nora pushed in a cart loaded with a lavish meal, delivering the message plainly. "This is what Lady Irene told me to bring you, but don't go getting any ideas. My lady's instructions were, I've already eaten my fill so you can handle the rest yourself." With that, Nora turned and walked out immediately, leaving Uriel alone with the tray of food, sealed under a silver lid. He slowly lifted the lid, and the rich aroma of a steaming buttery steak instantly filled the room. The corner of Uriel's mouth curved into a gentle smile. "You liar." The next morning, the atmosphere in front of the Duke's estate was buzzing with excitement. A gorgeous carriage stood ready to depart for Lady Tricia's birthday party. Lucia, in an elegant emerald gown, smiled brightly as she chatted about gifts. Second young Master Arwen chimed in eagerly, confirming everything had been neatly loaded onto the carriage. But just as they were about to board the carriage, Jason suddenly hesitated. He turned to look back at the quiet estate, a flicker of worry and self-reproach crossing his face. Seeing Lucia ask what was wrong, he said uneasily, "No, it's nothing. It's just, I feel bad leaving Irene home alone. Maybe I should let Arwen escort you to the party, and I'll stay here with her instead." Jason's words hit Lucia like a slap to the face. She hurriedly grabbed his arm, her voice turning sweet. "Brother Jason, I heard the third prince will be at today's party too. Didn't he say he wanted to discuss an important trade matter with you? Isn't this the perfect opportunity?" Hearing mention of the third prince and the family's diplomatic affairs, Jason was completely won over. He sighed and agreed, climbing into the carriage. The clatter of hooves rang out as the magnificent carriage carrying Lucia and her two brothers slowly departed the estate. Lady Tricia Callisto's birthday party was in full, extravagant, bustling swing. Lucia sauntered in proudly, arm in arm with the two Ashburn young masters. The surrounding guests couldn't stop gossiping, praising her saintly kindness, while also making sure to sneer that the #1 villainous Irene wasn't even on today's guest list. The flattery went straight to Lucia's head, making her preen with arrogant pride. Exactly. This attention, this spotlight, this is where I truly belong. A crude woman like Irene, how could she ever deserve to be here? Back at the Ashburn estate, Irene was still buried in her ledgers, reviewing them until she was thoroughly exhausted. Watching her lady's lonely figure, the maid Nora couldn't help but well up with tears of pity. Assuming her mistress must be terribly bored, Nora rushed over, suggesting eagerly, "My lady, why don't you go out for a walk in town with me today? There's a huge fair going on in the southern district. Merchants from all over have gathered with all kinds of rare treasures. If you're not interested in that, we could go watch the arena, or check out the animal circus instead." "Come on, my lady, let's go out and have some fun." Looking at Nora's puppy-eyed pleading, Irene laughed and nodded in agreement, since Uriel had the day off today. Irene ended up asking Luca, a rather stern and hard-to-approach knight of the family, to escort her. The Creed Fair in the south was indeed bustling and lively, the calls of merchants hawking fabric echoing all around. Irene led Nora by the hand, eagerly diving into the crowd, telling herself they'd just take a quick stroll and head back. But little did they know, from the very moment they'd stepped into the market, a middle-aged man with a sinister smile had been silently trailing them from a dark corner, his eyes gleaming with ill intent. Irene stopped in front of a handcrafted perfume stall, admiring the delicate, sparkling glass bottles, smiling to herself. "How lovely, I'll pick out a really fragrant perfume to bring back for Lady Melinda." Suddenly, with a thud, a hooded figure brushed past, colliding hard into Irene. And before she could even register it, the stranger had slipped a hand around her waist with lightning speed. The coin purse tied at Irene's hip vanished without a trace, the stranger melting into the crowd and disappearing in the blink of an eye. Startled, Irene looked down at her hip and realized her purse was gone. "My purse is missing. There's a pickpocket." Hearing her words, Luca's expression instantly changed. But instead of hunting down the actual suspect, he grabbed an innocent passerby, shouting angrily, "You did this, didn't you?" Ignoring the poor man's desperate protests of innocence, Luca hastily dumped the entire pile of bulky gift boxes onto the maid Nora, then eagerly chased after the wrong man fleeing the scene. Poor Nora could only hold the towering pile of items, fuming helplessly. Standing in the middle of the bustling market, Irene's sharp instincts picked up on something wrong. She quickly shouted for Luca to come back, but it was useless. The foolish knight had already chased his mistaken target too far away. Realizing he'd been spotted, the real thief clicked his tongue and made a run for it. Irene immediately sounded the alarm. If that pouch marked with the Ashburn family seal fell into the wrong hands with ill intent, the consequences for her and the family could be dire beyond measure. She quickly told Nora to stay put and wait for Luca, while she herself hiked up her skirt and gave chase after the thief. In the middle of the crowded market, Irene, drenched in sweat, ran while shouting for someone to stop him. The thief shoved his way roughly through the crowd to clear a path. Just then, a luxurious carriage rolled past. From inside, someone lifted the curtain slightly to look out, and couldn't help but be stunned to see the Ashburn family's eldest daughter running down the street, drenched in sweat. Irene chased the thief into a deserted alley, but the moment she rounded a dark corner, she lost sight of him. Before she could catch her breath, the thief emerged from the shadows behind her with a sinister grin. "Well, kid, I didn't think you'd actually chase me all the way here." Irene backed away, trembling. The thief slowly drew out a cold, sharp dagger, laughing menacingly. "What's wrong? Scared now, are you? Too bad it's already too late for regrets." The cold blade rose, aimed straight at her. In that moment, right before death, Irene could only close her eyes in despair and scream inside her mind. "Uriel, save me." With a slash, a blade cut through the darkness like wind. Red blood sprayed everywhere. Irene opened her eyes, trembling, completely unharmed. Before her, the bloodied dagger fell with a clang onto the cold ground. And standing tall, shielding her, was a towering figure, gripping a long sword still dripping with fresh blood. Assuming Diane had come to save her, she called out hesitantly, "Diane." But when the figure stepped out of the shadows, Irene froze completely. It wasn't Diane at all, it was Beau Flores, sword dripping with fresh blood in hand, wearing a thoroughly playful smile. "Lady Irene, are you disappointed? Sorry to say, it's me who saved you, not Diane." Irene's face flushed with embarrassment. Flustered, she waved her hands, explaining, "That's not it at all. Thank you for saving my life." She quickly changed the subject, asking why Beau was here instead of at Tesfino. Beau scratched his cheek, about to explain, when a chillingly dark aura suddenly enveloped the little alley. A cold shiver ran down Irene's spine, and she slowly turned around. Standing behind her was none other than her own father, Duke Raymond Ashburn. His face was cold, utterly devoid of emotion, as he gave a brief, commanding order. "Come with me." The atmosphere inside the carriage on the way back to the estate was so tense it was hard to even breathe. Irene and the Duke sat facing each other, but neither said a word to the other. Looking at her father's stern, cold expression, Irene screamed inwardly, her body trembling with fear. But then the Duke unexpectedly broke the silence with a low voice. "From now on, don't go out alone without telling anyone. Security in the capital has been getting worse these past few years." Irene, flustered, quickly nodded in agreement, and the atmosphere fell back into awkward silence once more. The Duke cleared his throat rather stiffly, then said quietly, "That pastry you sent the other day was delicious. I heard you made it yourself." Irene's eyes widened, and she murmured softly, "Yes, sir." And the atmosphere lapsed back into awkward silence yet again. Fortunately, Beau spoke up cheerfully at that moment. "We've arrived home." Hearing that, Irene let out a breath of pure relief. Finally, they were home. But the moment she stepped down from the carriage, she froze completely. The luxurious carriage had finally come to a stop in front of the magnificent estate of Marquis Callisto. Inside the banquet hall, Lucia, in her emerald gown, was showing off her polished diplomatic skills. She smiled brightly, greeting Marquis Callisto through an introduction from her friend Trisha. Hearing the name Crawford, the Marquis's brow furrowed slightly. Meanwhile, deep down, Lucia was gloating, thinking that her long campaign of clinging to that foolish girl Trisha had finally paid off. Marquis Callisto was the man who had offered up 5 precious mineral mines to the Emperor in exchange for a marriage alliance between the third prince and his beloved daughter Trisha. Though he'd only risen to prominence in the past 2 years, his abilities were nothing to scoff at. "If I can win him over now, my future is sure to open up wide." Just as Lucia was drowning in her own self-satisfaction, Marquis Callisto's booming laugh rang out toward the main entrance. "Raymond, I honestly didn't think you'd make it. Ha ha ha." Striding into the hall was none other than the illustrious Duke Raymond Ashburn, with Irene walking awkwardly beside her father. When asked about the girl accompanying him, Duke Raymond introduced her simply, "This is Irene, my beloved daughter." That statement landed like a bomb, leaving Irene wide-eyed with shock. Had he just called her his beloved daughter? Marquis Callisto warmly welcomed Irene. "So this is Irene, my how you've grown. Come here." All around, the crowd of guests began whispering excitedly. Murmurs rippled through the room. I honestly thought even her own parents had abandoned her. Turns out the rumors were nothing but nonsense. Blood ties really are the most precious bond of all. Look at that. Lady Irene really is quite beautiful, isn't she? Watching the spotlight that should have been hers get stolen away in an instant, Lucia stood in a corner, her face darkening ominously. But today's party wasn't done yet. From the doorway, another special guest arrived, greeted with eager enthusiasm by the Callisto family's eldest son. "Lord Fenn, please, this way. It's truly an honor for our family to have you visit." That distinguished guest was none other than Fenn, a powerful noble of the mighty Bambach Empire. He walked with a cold, composed bearing, his sharp, deep blue eyes taking in the room. "From now on, let's continue maintaining this good relationship between us." At that moment, Irene was resting her chin on the balcony railing, watching the bustling crowd below with a weary sigh. "They told me to go entertain myself, and yet everyone's dodging me like I'm some kind of plague." What exactly did the original owner do to earn this? A string of the villainous Irene's glorious past deeds flashed through her mind. Beating up other ladies, wrecking parties, and flipping over tables. Irene could only laugh wryly to herself. Well, I guess I can't really blame them. But honestly, this works out fine. At least I don't have to bother with empty small talk, and I avoid arousing suspicion too. And most importantly, I don't have to look at Lucia's smug peacock face strutting around out there. Lost in her thoughts, Irene suddenly noticed a figure down in the garden. A man with elegant platinum hair, deep in conversation with someone. Suddenly he lifted his head, his sharp gaze locking onto her figure up on the balcony. Their eyes met across the open space. Irene fell into thought, that gaze. It feels like she'd seen it somewhere before. Before she could gather her thoughts, familiar, unhurried footsteps approached from behind. "Irene, why are you standing here alone in a daze? I heard you came with father, so I've been searching for you this whole time." Jason offered to take her for a walk, or perhaps to go chat with Lucia. Irene curled her lip, thinking to herself, has he already forgotten about the torn kite the other day? I'm not nearly close enough with her for that. Seeing Jason's flustered expression, Irene suddenly shifted her tone, putting on a blunt smile. "Oh, don't tell me you want me to play the role of a sweet, doting little sister who loves her family just to save face for you?" If that's the case, I'm happy to indulge you. Jason could only call out sadly, Irene. A soft laugh rang out, cutting through the awkward tension between the two siblings. A dashing blonde-haired man in royal attire stepped out. Oh my, sorry about that, I didn't mean to eavesdrop. You two seem awfully close. That was Bernard Chesterton, the third prince of the mighty Orbipro Empire. Seeing him, the original novel's details instantly surfaced in Irene's mind. The third prince was different from the other high-born princes. He was born to a mother of common birth. To avoid the palace's prying eyes and jealousy, he'd been forced from childhood to keep his head down, living an extremely cautious, low-profile life. When Marquis Callisto proposed a political marriage to the emperor, Bernard had been chosen to marry Lady Tricia precisely because of his humble origins. And yet, in a royal family teeming with wolves ready to devour each other alive, anyone who could protect his own position for so many years could never possibly be a harmless little lamb. But while Irene was busy analyzing her rival, she had no idea that hidden behind a curtain in a shadowed corner, Lucia was fixing her with a sharp, dark gaze. The baying of hounds signaled that the hunt was officially about to begin, and the excited nobles spurred their horses forward. Bernard, riding his fine steed, slowly approached his fiancée Tricia, flashing a charming smile. Tricia, if I claim first place in today's hunt, I'll present you with the winner's crown myself. Tricia blushed, clasping her hands bashfully to her chest. I'll be looking forward to that. The hunting party disappeared into the forest, and the nobles surrounding Tricia showered endless praise on the third prince's sweetness, leaving her preening with pride. Meanwhile, over in a corner of the courtyard, Irene sat alone, leisurely sipping hot tea with a plate of cookies, sighing to herself. Going out hunting in the middle of this freezing winter, honestly, some people have too much time on their hands. Watching Irene's carefree ease, Lucia, the White Lotus, let out a cold sneer, and a wicked scheme instantly began forming in her mind. Lucia walked over to Tricia's side, remarking casually, "The third prince really is such a warm man, isn't he?" Though earlier I happened to see him chatting quite happily with Sister Irene. I don't know what they were talking about, but they looked so friendly. How odd, since when did the two of them get so close? Jealousy and possessiveness instantly ignited fiercely in Tricia's eyes. She clenched her fists, shooting a resentful, razor-sharp glare toward Irene, sitting off in the distance, sipping her tea. The wind rustled gently through the leaves of the dense forest. A startled deer was bounding through the underbrush when suddenly, with a thud, an arrow sliced through the wind and struck it in the flank. Andrew Calliston clicked his tongue in disappointment. Ah, missed. I was aiming right for its head. But there was no use running now. The sharp barking of the fierce hunting dogs rang out as they lunged forward, savagely tearing into the poor creature. Andrew laughed heartily, thoroughly delighted, generously rewarding the prey to his savage hounds. Standing beside him, Fen raised an eyebrow slightly, watching the whole scene. Andrew, unfazed, remarked casually, "These hunting dogs were raised under extremely strict training. Brave, loyal, and remarkably good at reading people. Given the chance, they could easily tear apart anything, even their own master." Fen fell into a brief silence at that, but said nothing more. Back at the banquet hall, Irene was still leisurely sipping her tea alone. She sighed, telling herself this party really was dull, but at least the desserts here were delicious. If the nobles around her would just stop staring at her like some circus oddity, perhaps she could have enjoyed this afternoon a lot more fully. A maid approached, asking respectfully, "Lady Irene, shall I pour you some more tea?" Irene nodded in thanks and went on eating her pastry, completely unaware that the maid had shot her a sharp, sinister glance. The woman secretly pulled a small vial from her sleeve, quickly sprinkling a glittering powder onto Irene's dress before bowing respectfully and stepping back. Irene, none the wiser, kept sipping her tea, completely unaware of what was closing in on her. Suddenly, cheers erupted from the edge of the forest. The prince has returned. Bernard led the hunting party back, bringing an impressive haul of game, including even a massive bear. Tricia rushed out joyfully to greet her fiancé, showering him with praise for his impressive prowess. Bernard smiled and replied, "I couldn't have done it without Jason's help." Just then, a triumphant smile spread across her face as Tricia glanced over toward Irene. The powerful hunting dog returning with the group suddenly came to a halt, sniffing the air, and its eyes instantly turned blood-red with bloodlust. It growled, its savage gaze locking directly onto the table where Irene sat. Seeing his sister standing alone in the distance, Jason moved to go check on her, But Lucia, the White Lotus, wasn't about to let that happen so easily. She immediately rushed over, clinging tightly to Jason's arm, using sweet, coaxing words to distract him. "Brother Jason, tell me about the hunt. I want to hear it straight from you." Jason hesitated for a moment, and that very hesitation is what allowed disaster to strike. Woof, woof! The sharp, savage barking of the crazed hunting dog rang out. It broke free of its leash and, out of control, lunged straight through the panicked, screaming crowd of nobles. Watching the massive beast charging directly toward her, Irene froze in shock. "That dog, is it coming for me?" Before she could dodge, the beast leapt, knocking over the tea table before her. Irene screamed and fell to the ground. The crazed dog lunged, tearing at the hem of her dress. Witnessing his sister in danger, Jason shouted in horror, "Irene!" He tried to rush forward to save her, but Lucia clung to him tightly, pretending to be terrified, sobbing. "Oh, this is so scary, Brother Jason, please don't go." The crazed beast sank its teeth into Irene's arm, its sharp claws digging deep into her flesh. Fresh blood poured out instantly, staining her once pristine white sleeve red. In pain and despair, tears streamed down Irene's face as she turned her pleading eyes toward her only brother present. "Brother Jason, save me, brother." Jason anxiously urged Lucia to let go, but she kept pretending to be too terrified to move. "I'm too scared to move at all." Standing amid the crowd, the third Prince Bernard silently observed the entire scene, and seeing the wound bleeding on Irene's pale skin, the prince's face flushed with an unsettling excitement. The beast, having lost all reason, opened its blood-soaked jaws, claws aimed straight at Irene, ready to deliver the killing bite. Irene squeezed her eyes shut, waiting in despair for the scythe of death to fall. Just then, a blade sliced through the wind, cutting across the evening mist, red blood spraying everywhere. The beast's head fell, severed, rolling across the grass, and the pain she'd braced for never came. Irene opened her eyes in shock. A warm hand, steady and strong, pulled her up into an embrace. Looking up at the tall figure who had just saved her life, Irene murmured in awe, "It's him, the mysterious platinum-haired man." Seeing her dress torn open from the chaos, he wasted no words, decisively removing his own black cloak, gently wrapping it around Irene's trembling shoulders. "Here, take this." Just then, Jason came rushing over in a panic. He hurriedly reached out to take his sister. "Thank you for saving my sister. But looking after Irene is my responsibility as her brother. Please hand her back to me." But in response to Jason's outstretched arm, Fane's gaze turned cold, delivering a scathing, sarcastic remark. "I would have thought a man so busy chasing after women wouldn't have a free hand to spare. Otherwise, how could you just stand there and watch your own sister nearly get mauled to death by a wild animal?" The blunt jab left Jason frozen in shame. Standing behind him, Lucia, the White Lotus, went pale, hastily stammering an explanation. "Everything happened so fast, we're truly grateful to you. But Irene is injured. Wouldn't it be better to let her family take care of her? Besides, men and women shouldn't be so familiar with each other." Before she could even finish her sentence, Fane's deep blue eyes bore down on her with crushing pressure, freezing Lucia stiff with fear. He turned coldly to Jason. "If you have time to stand here blocking my way, you'd be better off investigating why that hunting dog targeted her in the first place." With that, Fen turned and walked away coldly, leaving all the nobles standing there in stunned silence. Watching from a distance, the third Prince Bernard narrowed his eyes slightly as he watched the two of them go, the corner of his mouth curling into a mysterious smile. Fen carried Irene steadily through the long corridors of the palace. Irene rested her head wearily against his warm chest. The Callisto family's eldest son, Andrew, hurried to lead them to a guest room. Fen spoke up briefly, apologizing to their host for the intrusion. But Andrew quickly waved it off. "Don't worry about it at all. If the Duke's daughter came to any harm here, our family wouldn't be able to bear the consequences." Turning to Irene, Fane gave quiet instructions. "Andrew, please hurry and fetch a doctor, and prepare a fresh set of clothes for the lady while you're at it. And don't forget to notify Duke Ashburn." Fen steadily set Irene down gently onto the soft, cushioned bed. He carefully pulled the blanket over her, his voice calm and soothing. "You're safe now. Your father will be here soon, so just rest easy." With that, he turned to leave. But a small hand suddenly reached out, gripping the sleeve of his coat. Irene looked up at him with her deep blue eyes, hesitating slightly. "Thank you for saving my life. If it's all right, could you tell me your name?" He paused, turning his head slightly to look at her. In that moment, the whole world seemed to still in his eyes. An invisible question suddenly gripped his mind. Who am I, really? Am I Humanot? Am I Diane von Bessel? Or am I Uriel Gallerini? When that day comes, when I truly cast off this mask, who will I become then? You don't need to know that. Uriel gently but firmly pulled his sleeve free from Irene's grip. With that, he delivered a cold, quiet refusal. Our meeting was nothing but a passing joke of fate. I'm certain we'll never cross paths again. Rest well. The door closed, leaving Irene alone in the room. She lay on the spacious bed, clutching the blanket tightly, smiling to herself shyly. But somehow I have a feeling that one day we're certain to meet again. Meanwhile, back at the Ashburn estate, the caravan of goods the Duke had brought back from Tesfino had finally arrived at the mansion. The servants bustled about, calling out to each other as they hauled goods into storage, the whole scene wonderfully lively. But no one noticed, beneath one slowly moving carriage, a small figure was quietly slipping down. It was none other than the boy from the Borson tribe from the slums the other day. The boy tumbled to the ground, scrambling up, rubbing his hip. Ouch, that hurt. Looking up, the boy couldn't help but marvel at the magnificent, dazzling mansion before him. Oh, so this is Duke Ashburn's estate? Does that mean my benefactor lives here too? The atmosphere in Marquis Callisto's room was tense enough to choke on. A resounding slap and a scream of pain rang out. Trisha crashed to the floor, clutching her reddened cheek, tears streaming down. Standing before her, Marquis Callisto roared furiously, "You fool! Do you have any idea what a catastrophe you've caused?" But Trisha still stubbornly argued back, aggrieved. I was just teaching a girl I don't like a lesson. It's not like it's the first time. Why is father making such a fuss over it? Hearing this only enraged the Marquis further. I've indulged you far too much. Do you think our family is really as glamorous as the rumors suggest? I've had to use every trick I know just to borrow Duke Ashburn's influence to secure our footing in the capital. And yet you were foolish enough to go pick a fight with his daughter. If we can't come up with a satisfactory explanation, we could lose our entire title. By this point, Trisha was truly terrified, her face drained of all color. That can't be, I didn't know. Andrew, sitting nearby, offered gently, What's done is done. There's no undoing it now. Why don't we abandon this plan of relying on the Ashburns and find another path instead? Actually, Lord Fen of the Bambach Empire has been showing interest in our family lately. A calculating gleam flickered in Marquis Callisto's eyes. He pondered for a moment, then ordered his son, Go send word at once. I want to meet with him. Late that night, in a romantic garden, the third Prince Bernard stood silently beneath the moonlight, when Trisha came running from a distance and threw her arms around him. Bernard noticed the red mark on his fiancée's beautiful face. He gently touched her cheek, asking with visible concern, Trisha, what happened here? Who did this to you? Trisha answered pitifully, It was my father, but it's nothing serious. He probably just had a rough afternoon and took it out on me. Bernard's eyes narrowed, his gaze suddenly turning cold. Seeing you hurt like this, my heart aches too. I can't bear the thought of anyone daring to touch you. With that, he tightened his fingers slightly, accidentally pressing right on her reddened wound, making Trisha wince in pain. Bernard quickly pulled his hand back, comforting her awkwardly. I'm sorry. Did I hurt you? Trisha shook her head softly. It's all right. Having you here already makes me feel so much better. Thank you, Bernard, for everything. Bernard gently stroked her hair, but behind that warm embrace, his eyes were utterly cold, looking at her like some worthless pawn. You don't need to thank me. Returning to his own chambers at midnight, the moment he stepped through the door, the gentle smile from earlier vanished instantly from the prince's face without a trace. He coldly stripped off the cloak and gloves he'd just used to embrace and stroke Trisha's hair, tossing them roughly to a servant, barking out an order, Burn these. To him, anything that had touched Trisha was filthy, unworthy of ever being worn again. But that disgust was nothing compared to the horrifying secret hidden deep beneath the royal palace. Holding a flickering candle, Bernard slowly descended a dark underground passage, leading to a dungeon reeking of blood. On a rotting wooden table, sharp torture instruments lay scattered, stained with fresh blood, utterly gruesome. At the far end of the dungeon, a pitiful girl in tattered rags, her whole body covered in bleeding wounds, chained down with heavy iron shackles, lay barely breathing in a cold pool of blood. Bernard strolled over unhurriedly, kneeling down beside her, gently touching the girl's face with a smile so gentle it sent chills down the spine. I heard you haven't eaten anything in 2 days. I told you already. I absolutely hate pets that don't know how to obey. With that, he gripped the girl's chin tightly, his eyes darkening with malice. The poor girl could only whimper weakly in despair before breathing her last. Looking down at the cold corpse at his feet, Bernard clicked his tongue and stood up, wiping the blood from his hands. Well, I've got an opening now. He smirked, his sinister smile glinting under the flickering candlelight. A new target had already formed in his mind, a proud, far more intriguing prey, an opening for my next little pet. That night at the Ashburn estate. Inside the quiet sick room, the Duke sat by the bedside, looking at his daughter who had just survived quite a scare. A complicated wave of emotion stirred inside Irene. This man called father, could she really trust him? A painful memory from her past life suddenly surfaced. Back then, she'd still been little Haruna, standing by the edge of a lake, her whole body trembling with fear. The son of her father's business partner had shoved her into the lake, but had shamelessly turned around and slandered her, pinning all the blame on her instead. Little Haruna, panicked, had grabbed her father's sleeve and sobbed, begging, "I'm not lying. Father, please believe me." But in response to her helpless tears, her father back then had simply looked down at her with cold eyes, dismissing every word of her explanation without a second thought. Apologize. I despise liars more than anything. In that moment, her entire world had collapsed. She'd had no choice but to bow her head, swallow her tears, and mutter an apology under the smug gaze of the one truly at fault. I always thought parents were supposed to protect their children, but to my father, my feelings meant nothing compared to how he looked in other people's eyes. I had truly trusted him once, but he never once trusted me. Back in the present, Irene looked up at the Duke's figure. Would this man actually trust her? The door to Irene's room clicked shut, and out in the hallway, the atmosphere froze into suffocating tension as the three Ashburn men faced off. Eldest son. Jason stepped forward anxiously to ask his father, "Father, how is Irene doing?" But second son, Arwen, standing beside him, clicked his tongue, crossing his arms with obvious irritation. "She's already been treated, what's there to worry about? Everyone's making such a fuss over nothing." In the very next instant, the Duke's expression darkened sharply, his cold eyes sweeping over his two sons. And he said coldly, "Both of you, come with me." Inside the bedroom, the maid Nora knelt by the edge of the bed, sobbing so hard she seemed ready to flood the entire room. "My lady, seeing you hurt like this breaks my heart. This is all my fault. If I hadn't invited you out, you wouldn't have had your purse stolen, and we wouldn't have run into the Duke, and never gone to that party at all. And you wouldn't have ended up mauled by that beast like this. I deserve to die. It's all because of me." Watching Nora cry so pitifully she seemed ready to flood the whole estate, Irene could only laugh helplessly, trying to comfort her. Deep down, she thought, if I let her keep crying like this, she'll probably trace it all the way back to the dawn of creation. She reassured her easily. "It looks worse than it is. It's mostly just scratches. This is nothing." But right at that moment, the terrifying memory from earlier suddenly came rushing back into Irene's mind. That nightmare made her chest tighten, her face going pale, breath coming in rapid gasps, her whole body trembling uncontrollably. In her panic, Irene's hand accidentally brushed against the elegant black cloak lying beside her. The warmth from the fabric suddenly reminded her of the protective embrace of that silver-haired young man earlier today. That gentle memory helped Irene gradually calm down. Staring at the cloak, she called out, "Nora!" The maid, still sniffling, answered, "Yes, my lady, you called?" "Go get Diane for me." The moment Diane appeared, Irene immediately stepped closer, her gaze full of suspicion. "Where did you go today, and what were you doing?" Faced with the lady's interrogation, Diane smiled with a hint of mischief, answering in a playful tone. "I'm truly honored that Lady Irene cares about me this much. But if I answer honestly, I'm afraid it might sully the ears of someone as pure as yourself." Before Irene could even process that, Diane suddenly leaned in close, breathing warmly against her hand as he whispered, "Because I spent the whole day at the red light district." His words left Irene frozen, her face flushing red with embarrassment and shock. The red light district? Her mind instantly conjured images of decadent revelry from that place, where beautifully dressed women seductively lured in customers, and Diane leisurely basking in the attention of dozens of beauties surrounding him. The more she thought about it, the more embarrassed Irene became, and she couldn't help but shove his face away. Diane kept his shameless expression intact. "Wasn't it you who asked, my lady?" Irene turned away helplessly, clutching her head and scolding herself for being so oversensitive. It really was laughable that she'd once suspected Diane and the noble Lord Fen could possibly be the same person. This man was clearly nothing but a shameless pervert. Irene screamed inwardly. There's absolutely no common ground between the two of them at all. Right at that moment, a sudden sharp pain shot through her injured ankle, throwing her off balance. Irene stumbled, her whole body pitching backward. Luckily, Diane moved fast as lightning, wrapping his arm around her waist to catch her. Careful. His firm arm held her steady in midair. Irene's eyes widened in shock. What is this feeling? This close physical contact reminded her of the tight, protective embrace Fen had given her that morning when she'd been hurt. Irene's heartbeat spiraled out of control, pounding relentlessly as if trying to burst from her chest. She could only stay silent, pressed close against him, her mind completely blank with confusion. Noticing her silence, Diane tilted his head down to look at her. Lady Irene, what's wrong? Seeing Irene's face flushed a deep rose color, Diane swallowed hard, his eyes betraying a flutter he'd never felt before. The memory from that time in the water flickered through his mind, making the atmosphere in the room suddenly turn stifling and thick with tension. Diane called softly, Lady Irene. He leaned in closer, bowing his head toward her hand, whispering in a low, mesmerizing voice, the fact that you'd invite a man into your private room at such a late hour like this. Diane tightened his hold on her waist slightly. Is it simply because you're too carefree? Or is it a sign of trust? Before Irene could gather her wits, Diane gave her a gentle push, causing her to fall backward onto the soft bed. His face was now right above hers. My dear Lady Irene. He pinned both her hands down, leaning in low to whisper, Your maid must have taught you this before, hasn't she? That every man in this world... He paused for a beat, staring straight into her trembling eyes before smiling faintly. Is a beast. With that, Diane leaned down and pressed a passionate kiss upon her, his hot breath grazing the curve of Irene's neck, his lips lightly grazing her sensitive skin, sending her into a panic. Stop it, Diane. Irene shoved against his chest with all her strength, but Diane just gave a soft, meaningful hum, whispering provocatively, Is that all you've got? You could use far more forceful ways to refuse me, you know. Irene's face burned with embarrassment, and seeing him about to push things further, she couldn't hold back any longer and swung her hand. Crack. A sharp slap rang out through the quiet room. Irene panted and shouted, I told you to stop! The slap knocked Diane's face to one side, but he showed no anger at all. Touching his slightly reddened cheek, smirking playfully, that slap was way too gentle. You're going to try to stop someone who genuinely wants to have his way with you using something that weak? Irene's face flushed red, crossing her arms defensively. Right at that moment, Diane suddenly stood up, resolutely shedding his outer coat, revealing his toned frame beneath his white shirt. He drew out a sharp dagger, its hilt inlaid with delicate gold. If you want to fight back, Diane said, placing the hilt into her hand. At the very least, you should be using this. Irene stared blankly at the gleaming blade. Before she could even process it, Diane had already gripped her hand firmly, slicing open his own shirt, pressing the sharp tip of the blade right against his own body, pinning it there. A single stab to the abdomen won't kill instantly, but it's enough to leave your opponent unable to move. A strike to the internal organs causes excruciating pain and can lead to death, but you'll need to use considerable force to actually pierce through. With that, he slowly guided her dagger-wielding hand to rest right against his own throat, saying calmly, That's why I'd recommend aiming for the neck. It's easy to reach, and by cutting through the windpipe or the carotid artery, you could take down an opponent with a single strike. Diane looked straight into Irene's wide eyes and asked softly, Have you got all that memorized now? Irene stared at the blade pressed against his throat, then looked up and asked, Why are you teaching me this? The playful look on Diane's face vanished entirely, replaced by an incredibly serious expression, and he gently cupped her bandaged hand. If something like today ever happens again, I want you to be able to protect yourself, instead of just standing there trembling, begging for help in vain. In the dim room, his voice dropped low. Never trust a man who tells you he'll protect you. In the end, the only thing that can truly protect you is your own two hands. Irene fell silent at his words. She looked up at him, her deep blue eyes shadowed with doubt. So does that mean I shouldn't trust you either? Diane's eyes narrowed slightly, and he thought to himself, That's right. One day I too will leave this place. That's exactly why you shouldn't pin your hopes on something impossible. But out loud, he simply said, "Bodyguard nights work in shifts. There will be times I'm not by your side." And trouble always seems to know exactly when to strike at moments like that. Better safe than sorry, right? Hearing that, a spark of determination lit up in her eyes. Then it settled. Diane turned back in surprise. Irene broke into a resolute smile, raising the dagger high. "Teach me how to defend myself." Watching the powerful transformation in the woman before him, the corner of Diane's mouth curved into a smile. "As you wish, my lady." Meanwhile, in Duke Ashburn's study, a heavy, suffocating atmosphere hung in the air. One son had stood by and watched his own sister nearly get killed, while the other had abandoned his family just to chase after a married woman. What wonderful brothers you two turned out to be. His biting sarcasm left both Jason and Arwen pale, not daring to say a word. Duke Raymond snatched the whip from the tray. Swinging it hard, the crack tearing through the air. "Kneel. Jason will take 40 lashes, and Arwen 30. Just then, a maid whispered anxiously to Lady Melinda, "My lady, at this rate the two young masters will be seriously hurt. Are you really not going to stop the Duke?" Lady Melinda remained perfectly calm, still writing her letter, the scratch of her pen against the parchment sounding coldly deliberate. Seeing the maid about to plead further, she firmly slammed her hand down on the desk and said sternly, "When you make a mistake, you must face proper punishment. Raymond isn't wrong. But the problem is," her eyes turned sharp and dangerous, "there's still one more person who hasn't been punished yet." Lady Melinda poured red wax and stamped the family seal firmly onto the letter, then handed it to the maid. "Send this letter out first thing tomorrow morning." The bright red envelope bore the name of its recipient, Marquise Callisto. So who exactly is this person who still hasn't been punished? Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to follow the next episode.